Oh, hey, good morning, good afternoon, everybody, depending on which part of this beleaguered country that you're in. You're watching Rebel Roundup, Rebel News' daily news and opinion show, and it's live. I'm your host, Sheila Gunn. I'm joined by my friend and colleague, Tamara Ugolini in Cobourg, Ontario. Tamara, how's it going?
It's certainly going today, Sheila. One more day, TGIF. Very much looking forward to it. And I know
Same.
you are equally as, or even more so busy. Otherwise, other than that mayhem that seems to just be the never-ending saga of life. How are you?
Oh, just hanging in there. I'm ready to cross the finish line over the weekend. We have a big family engagement, very important one at the farm this weekend, and it seems as though every minute of every day, it comes to me that I have forgotten something, like a
Yeah.
dress. So,
Oh no. Oh no.
yeah, I got it covered, but I thought I had decided on something and then I forgot to go pick it up. So anyway, it's very, very busy next 48 hours here on the Reid Ranch. Let's get into the show. But first, I'll tell everybody how they can get involved. You're watching us on Rumble. Thank you for that. It's an excellent free speech platform. If you want to support the work that we do at Rebel News out of the goodness of your heart instead of compulsion by the government, you can leave Rumble Rant. That's their paid chat over there. And if it's over the $5 US cutoff, it's obligatory that we read it on air. If it's under that, we'll do our very best, time permitting. Now, I should put a caveat on that because as we end the show today, please don't click onto something else because we have Democracy Fund lawyers today testifying in front of the Senate committee on the attacks on free speech, in particular with Christians in this country. So they're making the case for civil liberties, free speech of religious people inside their religious institutions, because as you know, the federal government is removing the religious exemption to hate speech. And what you think is hate speech and what the government thinks is hate speech are two very different things. And you must remember that they put gender expression in as a protected human right. So let's say your Catholic priest is giving a homily on the theology of the body, which is accepted teaching of the Catholic Church. That might put him in front of the police. And that is the state of affairs here in Canada. And the Liberals say it isn't, but that's what the law says. So stay with us after the show, and you can watch lawyers from the Democracy Fund, but also Lisa Bildy and lawyers from the Justice Center making, I think, what I expect to be very compelling arguments. If you're watching us on YouTube, you can leave a super chat. That's the paid chat over there. Same rules apply, but also you can leave a super thanks if you missed the live version of the show. I think that's it. Let's get into the show. We've got floor crossing backstabber, former Conservative MP from Edmonton, who now sits in the Liberal caucus, although I believe he resides on Vancouver Island, Judas Matt Genereux. He says that he's great friends with now resigned MP, former Environment Minister Stephen Guilbeault, and he asks him for advice all the time. The guy who, through his own mismanagement, left Jasper to burn down. I guess he's a wealth of wisdom and knowledge to Genereux. Seems about right.
The MOU is a great day for Alberta. It was a great day. It continues to be exactly where this country needs to go, and that's what the Prime Minister indicated on that day, Premier Smith indicated on that day. We continue to move forward on the MOU, which is exciting for Albertans, and that's something that I think many Albertans share.
But you're moving forward without one of the key Quebec MPs, right?
Yeah, I'm not up on the latest from Stephen. Stephen's a dear friend. Like I wish him the best in whatever decision he ends up making. At the end of the day, he has been somebody who I have been able to ask advice for in the past, and I wish him well.
Should there be a Canada unity movement between Liberals and Conservatives? Would you be working?
100% there should be. We should have every colleague in this House, regardless which party you're with, to come and support Canada unity right now. Canada's worth fighting for this week. I hope so. I'm hoping people are. I continue to talk with with many of my colleagues on the Conservative side, and I notice a few of them have come out publicly and said statements. I encourage all of them to come out publicly and continue to say positive statements for national unity, because, again, this country is worth fighting for, guys. So,
yeah, I'm thrilled. Can you see how thrilled I am about the MOU? We're just dancing in the streets about it. Imagine relying on Stephen Guilbeault for advice. Like, by the way, we found that Stephen Guilbeault, who has been vicious in his attacks on the potential for Albertans to have a say in their own future. He's anti-Western separatist. We found that he donated to the Parti Québécois when they were in government. So he donated to the Quebec separatists while they were in government in Quebec, and while they were publicly saying that they would advance a referendum on independence within 2 years. That never happened. But that's when he donated. And so, for Matt Genereux to say that, like, it's, I love Stephen Guilbeault. We need to have all this federalist hand-holding. Maybe you should take a look at who you're holding hands with. Maybe.
Right. Well, exactly that. And taking advice from Stephen Guilbeault, as a disgraced floor crosser. And Stephen Guilbeault, I mean, he's at the heart of the reason why there are no pipelines built across this country. And so he's saying that he's so proud about the MOU and wants to continue, unifying Canada. And yet he's saying that he trusts the advice of and holds high regard for the guy who I would argue is single-handedly responsible for the economic disaster that we're in and the lack of ability for Canada to unleash its massive reserves of natural resources and start to actually build itself back up after 10 years of liberal ruin. So it seems like really odd comments to make if you're actually in favor of this MOU.
Well, that's such an excellent point. What was sort of a contained campfire situation became a Jasper wildfire situation, metaphorically speaking. There have always been Western separatists, but along comes 10 years of liberal mismanagement, 11 years of liberal mismanagement and obstructionism. And Stephen Guilbeault was the gasoline on that little campfire that turned it into a blazing prairie inferno of people who want to leave this country. Like, he, as you say, he's responsible for a lot of this mess. Let's move ahead. Carney says he's abandoning the Trudeau era effort to allow human rights complaints on hate speech. I don't believe this for a second. Prime Minister Mark Carney's government is abandoning efforts by his predecessor to introduce. Can we just scroll down? Olivia, please.
Oh, it might be behind the paywall.
No, we're good. To reintroduce into the Human Rights Act the ability to bring forward complaints of online hate speech. Section 13 was repealed under the Conservative government of Stephen Harper, in no small part thanks to the efforts of our boss, Ezra Levant. And the Trudeau Liberals said that they were going to put it back in. And now the Carney Liberals say they're going to abandon it, but I specifically don't believe this. They have sought time and time again, through successive election cycles, when these bills like Bill C-63 died on the order paper, because they're not, like, when the government calls an election, all the legislation that's not been passed and then ascended by the Governor General, all those things just die. They end and you have to reintroduce them, start the whole process again. Well, repeatedly, over and over again, what's the first bill these guys reintroduce after it dies on the order paper? Some version of a hate speech legislation that would monitor what you see and say online, and then add crazy criminal sanctions. Like, if the last time around, if they thought that you might hurt somebody's feelings in the future, you could be subject to fines, criminal sanctions, even ankle monitors. So I don't believe this for a second.
No, and it does say in the subhead that the government has not set a timeline on bringing forward a new online safety bill, right? So the censorship, it's just more double speak Orwellian adjacent stuff. It's framed as online safety and, of course, rammed through to actually do whatever the government deems is actually hate speech, which, I mean, there's already sections in the criminal code that deals with that. So if it's actually about hate speech, then it's just redundant. And if it's not, then it's obviously more censorship from the liberal loving censors of, well, now the Mark Carney government.
Well, and could we deal with the real life hate speech first? Like the burning of effigies of Jews in Montreal? Like, could we do something about that? I saw a lot of Liberal MPs complaining about having to look at it. And as I said the other day, I hope they find the people who have been in charge for the last 11 years and hold them accountable for not doing anything about it. We have already existing hate speech laws that deal with real life instances of calls to genocide. They're not enforcing them. I don't think we should give people who have already failed to enforce the current laws expanded powers to police the speech of people who are largely going to be critical of the Liberal government, which is really what this is all about.
Yeah, exactly. And then they'll just be able to get their way on everything, because other than if you're not on X, every other platform is largely censored and algorithm tampered. And so the Liberals will really have their way.
Yep. Speaking of Liberals really trying to have their way, Bill C-22 is the law. They call it lawful access, but it gives the government access to your cell phone. It's united all the tech bros around hating the Liberal government, all the VoIP and like all the ways that Canadians have used to get around internet censorship, which we already have, to see things that the government wouldn't allow us to see. All those companies are like speaking out. Normally they don't speak out. Like normally you don't see them dragging the public safety minister in the X comments, but they are now. And so Gary Anandasangri, my recent muse politically, I cut a few jokes about him at the CCFR AGM. He is accusing these companies of misinformation when they say you're going to censor us and therefore Canadians. And I'll make a point after this about potential implications here.
So when we talk about privacy, there's a real conversation to be had as to what that entails. So the companies that are coming forth and saying, talking about privacy protection, talking about vulnerabilities, better step up and provide their path to how they're protecting the privacy rights of Canadians.
Do you believe tech companies are misinforming Canadians on this bill?
I believe there's a number of areas of misinformation. And to be very clear, the encryption issue is one we will clarify, because so when we talk about privacy, there's a real conversation to be had.
He just did a total deflection blame game ploy there by calling on the tech companies to say how they're protecting privacy. I'm pretty sure, I mean, if anybody reads them, who knows, but I'm pretty sure they lay it all out in their privacy policies that are publicly and easily accessible. So that was, something that I always really like to hone in on when politicians speak, is how much they deflect and then flip the script onto the people that they're trying to frame as, in this situation, the misinformation mongers, if you will. But it's actually up to his government, who's passing the legislation, to show otherwise, not up to these tech companies to say how they're protecting the privacy. And I was reading through the comments, just a couple of them. And of course, now it's repopulated. So the first one that was there is no longer the first one. I don't know if I can find it again, but there was a fun little meme in there that I didn't even realize, Sheila, that Gary is not his full, I mean, I guess
no,
to be
he has a very
assumed, but
Sri Lankan first name.
Yeah, and so the meme in there had it, and it was so funny. Anyway, I'll see if I can find it again. But people in the comments are just calling him out for this nonsense.
Yeah, all the VPN companies are just absolutely roasting him online. And I think it's real rich that Gary Anandasangari says that the government cares about our privacy. I guess except insofar as to when it comes to vaccine passports, and then you have to produce your immunization status to the bartender or the flight attendant, or to the government in their flawed travel app, Arrive Scam, which erroneously sent some 10,000 plus people to wrongful quarantine under threat of a $5,500 fine, or specifically to Gary Anandasangari's file when it comes to gun owners who were subject to a privacy breach and he didn't inform any of us. Now, they can send me demand letters all the time about my firearms and emails persistently to remind me that it's time to pony up my firearms for the crusher. But they did not tell any of us, except, a vague posting on a website somewhere that you would never check, that our private data had been breached. And they didn't even really explain the extent of the private data that had been breached. Is it my name? Is it my birthday? Is it my address? Is it the make and model of my restricted firearms? At the very least, perhaps transnational criminal repression gangs know that I'm a firearms owner and they know where I live, thus making me a target, but also making me not so much of a soft target, if you people are watching. But he didn't care about our privacy then. So this is just because these people in government are a bunch of snoopy weirdos and they want to make themselves an enemies list.
Yeah, and don't forget that Gary Anandasangari files related to terrorist organizations in Sri Lanka and its Canadian front group. So this guy has some questionable ethics and background happening here, and he's in charge of our national public safety. Again, very Orwellian doublespeak that you would have someone that needs to recuse themselves from terrorist entities as the Minister of Public Safety. That how he even was handed this portfolio in the first place is absolutely wild to me.
Yeah, sometimes I just feel like the government is making fun of us with some of their appointments, like Lena Diab, just squinting her way through hearings. It just feels now it could be one of two things. The bench is really shallow over there. Like the talent pool is ankle deep over on the Liberal benches. So maybe this is the best they can produce, right? Maybe. Or they're just making fun of Canadians by just appointing whoever can be the most loyal and unquestionable to Mark Carney. Now, Gary Anandasangari, he says that no one in Canada should be afraid for their safety because of who they are or how they worship. And so he says there's the Canada Community Security Program. We're ensuring that vulnerable communities can receive the tools they need to stay safe. Okay, let's. Evan Solomon.
Yeah, they built a bureaucracy just for this.
The Spring Economic Update 2026 proposes to provide $75 million over 5 years to Public Safety Canada for the CCSP. The CCSP provides funding for communities at risk of hate-motivated incidents to enhance their security measures. This includes place of worship, schools, community centers, and other institutions.
So today's announcement, we wish we didn't have to do it. Let's be candid. This is a regretful moment in our country's history, but a necessary moment to help communities access the tools for protection, the security equipment, the emergency planning, the training, and the support for safer community spaces.
We're here, we've listened to you, and we will continue to listen to ensure that every single person in Canada have a sense of belonging and a sense of safety.
I didn't watch the whole thing. I was listening to it out of the corner of my eye because I was bringing up some things that I want to share Did anybody notice if they actually had a Catholic priest in that video?
I didn't see one.
Yeah, that's weird, right? Because the majority of the churches that were hit were Catholic churches. And when I say hit, I mean with arson and vandalism, because Justin Trudeau said that he understood why the arsons were happening in the wake of a discovery, just heavy on the quotation marks, discovery of some 200 plus unmarked graves of children at a residential school in Kamloops. Now, no excavations have occurred, no bones have been found, no children have been found. There's not even a list of names of kids that are missing. Like, you would think that if kids are missing, there would be a list of names of kids that are missing. But no, that's never been produced. And our friends over at Juno, they updated their churcharsons.ca map. 5 years out, 132 Christian churches across Canada have been burned or vandalized. This is an international disgrace at the hands of the Liberals. And again, instead of actually dealing with the problem of hateful acts, they're saying, well, what do you want us to do? Here's some money for security. Maybe we could throw the book at some of these people. Maybe we could arrest some of these people. Maybe we could stop lying about the residential school discovery or discoveries, which is fueling these vandalisms. And maybe, just maybe, you could have included a Catholic priest in your little video. Perhaps one wouldn't have participated, though, maybe.
Well, also, why don't we just stop letting criminals and other people with serious offenses into our country? I just shared a link to the screenshot I posted on X in response to Public Safety Canada. I believe that was last week. If we could scroll to, yeah, so there's a screenshot. So this comes from the 2025 annual report to Parliament on immigration. And look at all of the exemptions that we issue to people into this country. Thousands of people who are criminally convicted, organized crime, health grounds, people who are a danger to public health. Yikes. I mean, the list quite literally goes on and on. And the government, Public Safety Canada, Immigration, Refugees, and Citizenship Canada is just making these exemptions to individuals who are convicted of serious crimes in their countries of. So if the government says that this is a regretful moment, as they just claimed in this video, they're responsible for this moment, because the data is there that shows those are the people that came in, legally, that we know of. There's hundreds of thousands of others who are due for deportation, who are not eligible to become residents or temporary or international students or otherwise into this country, who the CBSA, the Canadian Border Services Agency, just lost track of. So no big deal there, I guess. But these are people who the government actually looked at and said, you know what? Sure, you're a public health threat. Sure, you're a public safety threat, but we'll just rubber stamp you into this country anyway. And I guess hope for the best, and then act surprised when there's targeted hate crimes happening on the streets of our country.
Yeah, when you let hundreds of thousands of people in from incompatible places who are taught to hate Jews, don't be surprised when the crimes against the Jewish community skyrocket, as they have in places all across this country. Yeah, that's wild about the communicable diseases. Like, I hadn't even thought of that.
I did a report on it, I think a year and a half or so ago. And so this is an updated, this is every year, by the way. This is just last year. This was 2024 numbers. The report came out to reflect 2025. But I think 2022 and 2023 last. And so it's thousands of people every single year. And then the government was, locking you down and telling you that you couldn't travel to go to your grandmother's funeral throughout COVID. Meanwhile, they're giving exemptions to people in foreign countries who have who knows what kind of communicable diseases.
If I had to guess, that it would be untreated HIV.
Yep.
From somewhere in Africa or Haiti. So these people come with untreated HIV. and become an instant burden on the healthcare system.
Yeah.
Instantly.
And there's like, you can see here, 3,000 of them are non-compliant with the act. And so that's in addition to the other 1,300 people who are convicted of serious criminal offenses in their country of origin. Actually, they break it up into two categories. There's serious criminality, and then there's just criminality. And so it is absolutely insane that the government acts like this is a regretful moment. The Liberals act like this is a regretful moment, and they, could have never anticipated we would be here. And these are the people that they're letting into the country.
Fantastic. Fantastic. We were at the halfway point, and I think instead of just carrying on and switching into the separatism debate, which happened over the weekend, but the video of it was published last night, I think we should an ad break, because it seems like a natural break, and we'll come back on the other side. In Canada, firearms owners like me understand the importance of safe, effective self-defense options. That's why we're proud to have Byrna as a sponsor. Byrna's less lethal launchers are designed to help protect you and your family without taking a life. Byrna offers peace of mind, accessibility, and a practical layer of personal security for Canadians who value safety. Learn more at byrna.ca/rebel. That's byrna.ca/rebel.
Canada's been told to just quit smoking for decades, same message over and over, and yet millions of Canadians still smoke. So let's ask a follow-up question. For those who don't quit, what about change? In 2026, Canada has options that didn't exist years ago. Smoke-free alternatives for adults who would otherwise continue smoking. That doesn't mean risk-free, it means informed choice. If you don't smoke, don't start. If you smoke, quit. But for those who don't quit, change could still be part of the conversation. That's why Canadians should check out unsmoke.ca, an information resource focused on smoke-free alternatives and honest facts, not judgment. Put the lighter down, Canada. Learn what your options are.
Gun bans make great distractions.
Trudeau may be gone, but Carney has picked up his same rhetoric.
We will quickly, and I mean quickly, reinvigorate the buyback of...
Hunters, collectors, competitors, and defenders of tradition are still being targeted, while criminals run wild under Liberal policy. But we are fighting back. Join us. Canada's National Firearms Association, in defense of freedom.
All right, we're back. And again, we're going to do our best to keep the show tight today. Premier Jason Kenney and independence-minded lawyer Keith Wilson engaged in a Federalist versus Separatist debate hosted by the Aristotle Foundation. Our friend Mark Milkey is the head of that. And it happened over the weekend, and the clips are live now of that exchange. Very gentlemanly, missing a lot of fire, but both sides were able to make their case. And so our first clip is from Jason Kenney saying, people are choosing Alberta, and so ipso facto, we should stay in the country. Anyways, I'll make my point after.
In fact, I believe Alberta is the most Canadian of provinces because we have been by far the biggest recipients, and I would say beneficiaries, of interprovincial migration. More people in Alberta have been born in other provinces than is the case in any other part of Canada. Indeed, nearly half of people in this province are born elsewhere. They're Albertans by choice and not chance. And for so many of those Albertans, their primary loyalty, while they love Alberta and are proud of it and want it to thrive and prosper, their primary loyalty is to our country, to Canada. In fact, I believe...
Okay, I'll make my point now. That's all well and good, but the theme of the point he's trying to make actually proves the separatist point, that people are leaving the rest of the country and heading to Alberta because the rest of the country is failing. That's a very important point. And that also means that a lot of people who are choosing Alberta as their home, unlike being an Alberta's child like me, those people are looking behind them over their shoulder at the rest of Canada and saying, no thanks. We need to protect what's here. Like there's a good chunk of those people who have come from somewhere else who are saying this place is great. It's the last stand and we've got to keep it that way. But the fact that people are migrating to Alberta en masse speaks to me that there's a problem with the rest of the country that I think we all see.
Yeah, exactly. And I think a vast majority of those people come from Ontario, actually. And so you can see the dumpster fire that is this province. There's no end in sight under progressive conservative Premier Doug Ford. And so people are going, well, where else can I go without paying insane fees to immigrate to the United States, where I can keep more of my hard-earned money, where I have a government who perhaps listens more to me or at all to me, where I have people of like mind, where, you know, my freedoms and my individual sovereignty is upheld and protected. And increasingly, those numbers obviously reflect that that is happening in Alberta. And so they're right there. Sadly, Jason Kenney proves that point, but is trying to somehow flip it to be the opposite. So, yeah, sad for him, I guess.
Then we've got the NDP leader, Avi Lewis, weighing in on Western separatism, as if we care.
Right, I was going to say, like,
NDP
why?
think? Oh, wow, thanks. I've changed my mind. I'm a federalist now. I've heard from Avi Lewis, and he made some really compelling arguments, said no Western separatist ever. I hope they make him the face of federalism. Let's watch.
The separation movement in Alberta has no point of comparison with the historic sovereignty movement in Quebec. This is a MAGA-aligned, potentially funded, disruptive movement that has been really thrown into national prominence by Danielle Smith addressing this question that a portion of her base, a small minority of Albertans, the vast majority of whom want to stay in Canada, don't want to have a referendum that will rip the country apart. So that it's not the same thing. The separation movement in Alberta
How does he know that? How does he know that the vast majority of Albertans want to stay in Canada if there hasn't been a vote?
Right. I was going to say there's one way to find out, isn't there?
Right.
And as he keeps talking, all you can see is why Albertans are increasingly frustrated, and a serious number, more than who vote NDP federally, by the way, here, want to leave. And it's because Quebec is treated as legitimate. Their grievances are legitimate. Their cultural grievances are legitimate. Alberta's grievances are cultural, definitely, but they're also economic. But if we talk about it, well, you're just MAGA funded, you're MAGA coded, American funded, but Quebec's, well, those are historic and legitimate. There's no evidence of foreign interference in the Alberta referendum process. The RCMP have come out and said that. And our grievances, by the way, Avi Lewis, they didn't just like pop up last week. We didn't like decide we didn't like Mark Carney and we're like, okay, we're out of here. These are 100 years brewing, 120 years, 21 years almost brewing, the unfairness within Confederation, and really have sort of really upticked and gotten organized recently, but really in the last 10 plus years. Guess who's been in charge in the last 10 plus years? So to say that this is just a recent development because we're just so darn Trumpy out here really delegitimizes Alberta's problems with the country. And I mean, the fact that we're not even allowed to talk about it. Our grievances are not treated as historic, but Quebec's, of course, they are.
Yeah, and here, let's just for some balance, we have this clip also from Keith Wilson, who's fighting or arguing the side of independence.
Canada's institutions, with all due respect, are corrupt. And we've all witnessed it. We've all witnessed it. And it's tragic and it's sad. And you know whose hearts bleed the most when they see it? The veterans. Because that's not what they fought for. That's not what they fought for at all. The Canada that exists today is not the Canada they fought for. And the reality is, you know, bankruptcy in 1936, Alberta ain't going bankrupt. Ottawa is, we need to separate from them. When you're told to be careful about what you tear down that fence, the truth of the matter, the sad truth of the matter is that fence that Mr. Kenney describes is laying on the ground, rotting, and we need to build a new one for us.
Uh-oh.
Yeah, the papers, please. Well, not analogy, but throughout COVID, having to show your papers, whether you're vaccinated, there was a point in time here in Ontario where you couldn't travel without your zone or outside of your zone. We were put into geographic zones depending on how much COVID you had in your area. And like restaurants were asking for your driver's license to dine in. This was a little bit before the vaccine mandates came out. They were asking you to show proof of residency to access, you know, hair salons, restaurants, basically like any sort of social activity that was open, which was still few and far between. And so papers, please, papers, please. And so there was a lot of veterans at that time coming out and say, you know, we fought against this very thing and now it's happening and everyone's just following along because it's under the guise of for your health and for your safety. So when he talks about veterans being hit hardest, my mind immediately went back to that pandemic response, and there's nothing in place to make sure that never happens again.
Yeah, and you know, I don't think Jason Kenney is the best guy to be arguing for the Federalist side, especially if you're trying to convince the roughly 40% of the UCP base who are not hardline separatists, but are definitely convincible, because those are the same people who threw him out on his ass after he abused them and went back on all of his promises during COVID. Those people don't like you, Jason Kenney. So you might be appealing to people in BC or Ontario or whatever, but at the end of the day, only Albertans get a vote. So, yeah, and with regard to, you know, trying to advance Alberta's position within Confederation, Jason Kenney was premier for 4 years.
Mm-hmm.
What changed? We tried it his way. Nothing changed. It didn't get better. We're still in the same terrible spot under the foot of the Laurentian elite. So what is he going to say or do that's any different than the things that he said or did already that haven't worked?
Right. Yeah, exactly. You had your chance.
Yeah.
Back down, back away slowly now.
Yeah. All of your strongly worded letters were in the garbage can in the Prime Minister's office. Nothing ever happened. So we've got this video here from Michelle Rempel-Garner, who squares off against Lena Diab in committee tonight, which should be a bit of a banger, because you know how Michelle just ragdolls Lena at committee all the time. But this is in the House of Commons. Immigration critic for the Conservatives, Michelle Rempel-Garner, talks about a student visa holder who organized thefts from an Alberta store 14 times, was convicted of a major crime carrying up to 10 years in prison, but he avoided deportation because he got house arrest. Let's watch.
Student visa organized major theft from an Alberta store not once, but 14 times.
Wow.
They were convicted of a major crime under Canada's Criminal Code, which carries a punishment of up to 10 years in prison. They should have been deported, as the law requires, but today we found out that they weren't. The National Post reported that a judge gave them a sweetheart deal, house arrest, so that they could avoid deportation. By voting against our bill to ensure non-citizen criminals don't get sweetheart sentences, the Liberals sent a message that it's okay for non-citizens to commit major crimes. Why?
Honourable Minister.
Mr. Speaker, that member knows that there is nothing in the Immigration Act that allows any judges to discount any sentences. She also knows that Canadian or not, no one can commit a crime on Canadian soil without impunity, including those that are on asylum, including anyone else. We have brought in We have brought in measures. We have brought in criminal bills. They keep avoiding voting with us, so we expect them to let us, in the next couple of weeks,
The honourable member for Calgary Nose Hill.
Well, the minister, she's right. There isn't anything in the criminal code. That's why we put forward a bill to put something in the criminal code to stop this. And yet, when she had an opportunity to sway the justice minister to support the bill, the man who created the massive liberal dumpster fire that she's perpetuating, she said, no, it's fine. Today, the Liberals are defending this abysmal practice. This is divisive post-nationalism that the Liberals have put forward for years. The respect for the rule of law is a minimum requirement for anybody in our country. And when they erode that, they erode our national identity. Every normal Canadian agree with this. Why don't they?
Hear, hear. The Honourable Minister of Justice.
Mr. Speaker, the issue that the member raises has been an issue in Canada for a number of years. She should know well as the Supreme Court of Canada in 2013 actually ruled on this specific issue. What's interesting about the timeline, Mr. Speaker, of that decision is that she was sitting in the federal cabinet at the time and chose to do absolutely nothing about it. For our part, Mr. Speaker, we are in the midst of launching the most serious set of criminal law reforms to strengthen the criminal code that this country has seen in generations. Regardless of your immigration status, if you commit a serious crime, you should be met with a serious penalty, and where a court deems appropriate, that can and should include deportation.
Well done, Sean.
This exchange is insane. Again, just going back to my earlier point that we let in thousands of people who have criminal records and offenses, including serious ones, because there's at least two different categories. I think there's actually a third. Every single year under the Liberals' watch. So that seems like a pretty easy fix. You can just say no. And then we could also deal with the people who have come here who are not supposed to be in Canada and start tracking them down and deporting them instead of just losing them and being like, oops, I guess they're somewhere out there. Maybe they'll try to cross the border into the US and then they'll catch them because they have actual enforcement.
Yeah, it's approaching 100,000 people that I just saw in an order paper question the other day who are deemed inadmissible, who they're loose. They don't know where they are. And they're not bothering to look. So those are criminals that you could deal with. But we don't deport people who are here illegally. So why would we deport people who came here in the gray area of legally, through a diploma mill or a temporary foreign worker, who then commits a crime? We don't deport anybody, I guess, is the argument the Liberals are making. So why would we deport those people? What a great country.
And I mean, welcome to Justin Trudeau era Liberal bail reform that allows for the proliferation of all of this. And then they're saying that they're taking all these steps to do X, Y, and Z. Well, you could just stop bail reform.
Right.
Or have never brought it forward in the first place.
Right. Let's go back to the mandatory minimums that they removed, and they removed them under the guise of systemic racism because they found that a certain demographic of people were continuing to commit these crimes, and thus a certain demographic of people were incarcerated at greater rates than everybody else. So they, instead of saying, oh, we got a problem here in this community, maybe we need to think, and I hate to use the phrase, but maybe we need to think about root causes here, like fatherlessness and all of those other things, that not having a father in your home is one of the key indicators of criminality down the road. So like maybe we wind back and address the social issues that this certain demographic is, ending up criminalized, for lack of a better word. Maybe we should have done something about that, but no. The Liberals stripped out the mandatory minimum sentences for a whole host of crimes, including gang-related stuff and gun-related stuff, under the guise of systemic racism. Then what happened is those same people who were given the benefit of, okay, you're getting a slap on the wrist because of systemic racism, you're getting a baby sentence, and then you get to go back to your community. Guess what they do to the community? Again, I'm going to use a left-wing term, racialized community that they're from. Guess what they do? They commit crimes in those communities. So you're not actually helping those people by releasing criminals back into their community. But what do I know? I'm just a hick farmer from Alberta.
Yeah, it's just colonialism,
Right.
that we all have to try to, I don't know, denounce and
Yeah.
let criminals run wild and free, because otherwise we're just a bunch of colonialists.
Right.
This next story is absolutely wild, but again, given all the context here, completely unsurprising. A trucker who caused a fiery, fatal collision on the Trans-Canada Highway. Yesterday or the day before, the video here, I don't know, I haven't seen it, so I don't know if we want to play it, but maybe we do. He was just this crash killed a father of two.
Yeah.
And the commercial truck driver has been fined $2,000 and been prohibited from driving for 5 months. Like, look at the carnage in this obviously rural mountain highway.
This is Highway 1. This is a busy highway despite the mountains there.
And super twisty, turning, winding roads, like that you need to proceed with caution on. Sandeep Singh Bains, 43, was sentenced Wednesday in Kamloops Provincial Court after pleading guilty to 1 count of driving without due care and attention, an offense under the Motor Vehicle Act. So what about the death part? I'd like to know.
Yeah.
So this actually happened on October 5th, 2023.
Yes.
Shortly before 7 a.m. that day, his trailer tipped on a curve in the road, probably because he's going too fast and not driving according to the road conditions in that area.
It was
causing
probably
his
slightly dark. It's October at 7 a.m. in BC. It would be just before sunrise. He's driving too fast, likely for the conditions.
Yeah. And then his semi rolled onto its side right into the path of a dump truck being driven by 41-year-old Rick Neal. And so he passed, but where was it down here? The reason for the slap on the wrist sentence was that defense lawyer Dan McNamee noted Bains were the same age, both with young children at home. And I think he used that as part of the defense as to why Mr. Bains what was his name? Sandeep Singh Bains needs to be at home with his young family. Meanwhile, this other young father will never return home to his family because he was killed.
Right. And by the way, the driver of the semi, despite this happening in 2023, and him being behind the wheel in 2023, when he's being sentenced now mid-2026, he's still using an interpreter in the courtroom. I thought that was pretty relevant. And he said it was a bad day that day. Do you think? Look at
For
this.
who?
Yeah.
Wow. Yeah, actually on the way to, there's so many anecdotes here. Like I see it all the time out in the roads, the highway in Ontario. I see it when there's a closure along the 401, trucks just completely disregarding the detour routes and driving on roads that are not meant for transport trucks to drive on, especially when there's load restrictions in the spring. But just anecdotally, on the way to the CCFR dinner on Saturday, their event, I was very late, but in addition to already running late, there was an accident which made me even more late. But there's a curve in the road in between where I live in Cobourg and the next town over, Port Hope, along the 401. And it's actually right where that constable, what was his name? Benjamin, shoot, I should know this. That's horrible of me not to know. He just tragically died at that very spot 2 weeks ago, the OPP officer. And my husband called me and he said, make sure that you detour around because there's another accident in that area. And I said, let me guess, it's a transport truck. And he said, yep, completely flipped over. I mean, it was downpouring that day, but you drive according to the weather conditions. And if you're driving a transport truck, like that's what you train for when you go through your schooling and your driver safety training, is how to drive to the weather conditions and operate those massive vehicles. And it is just becoming more and more of a problem instead of, anyone taking reasonable action to prevent more harm. You would think after that Humboldt Broncos incident where that driver killed, 15, 16 young boys with their, entire lives and potentially hockey athletic careers in front of them. That was in 2015, 16. Nothing's changed. It's been 10 years. The same stuff is happening over and over and over again.
And that driver has not been deported either, despite his horrible driving record and the fact that he blew through a massive stop sign that had blinking lights on it.
Yeah, because same sort of thing. Well, he has a young family. He has to, how devastating for his family if he were deported.
Yeah, that's okay. They'll hit the ground running back in India. It's okay.
Okay.
I see the CTF has followed up on a story that I covered the other day on Prime Minister Mark Carney and his entourage just blowing through in-flight catering. They spent $1,000 because there was a stain on one of the charter flight seats. They chartered a plane instead of waiting for the one that we all pay for to come back. And so the CTF has dug down on the in-flight catering for the Carney entourage. And beef tenderloin, a salad topped with cucumber pearls, braised beef served with red wine reduction, charcuterie, which I love, and a luxury Normandy buttercup, whatever that is. Give me all the charcuterie though. Keep the crackers, just put the meat and the cheese and the olives out and a couple of pickles. Don't put sweet ones on there. I'm calling the police. And I'm just a happy girl. I could eat charcuterie 3 meals a day. But we've got a video from our friends at the CTF on this.
Canadians were billed $195,000 for in-flight catering by the Prime Minister for 3 trips. Scottish salmon fillet, sautéed beef with world-famous creamy sauce, and for dessert, luxury Normandy buttercups. Every dollar this Prime Minister spent on his elite palate was first taken from a hard-working Canadian. This Prime Minister means more costs, more taxes, more debt, and more on the national credit card. Will he cut out his fine dining and rein in his inflationary spending so Canadians can afford to eat?
There you go. Honourable Government House Leader.
Mr. Speaker, when the Prime Minister travels, you know what happens? He brings back jobs, he brings back investment, he brings back opportunity for Indigenous people to participate with equity in projects. He brings back technology, he brings back expertise, he brings back military and industrial benefits to Canada. The Prime Minister travels, oh yes he does, and you know what he does? He brings back jobs and investment and energy to Canada.
So we should pay for his exquisite meals?
Right. Like, Stephen Harper didn't do this kind of stuff. We didn't pay for Stephen Harper's nanny. He knew that even fixing 24 Sussex would look bad because it would look like he was spending money on himself. But Carney is just living large, private jet charters instead of waiting for jets. And I guess it's because he's bringing back jobs. I'm looking for them. I can't find them. Bringing back expertise. Where? So all it is that we're just paying for him to eat and continue his luxurious lifestyle. We have to remember Mark Carney got in trouble when he was the head of the Bank of England for his outrageous spending habits. And he has not fixed that problem. He just has downloaded it onto us instead of the British taxpayer. Nothing has changed. He's just as bad as Justin Trudeau, maybe even worse.
Yeah, I would say probably worse. Not to mention the fact that we already fund his $400 and counting $1,000 a year salary.
Yeah.
Like at that rate, you can't pay for your own filet mignon and a couple of bottles of wine. I mean, if you're making $400,000+ a year, I would say you're more than capable of funding your own meals and paying for some, at least some of your own travel instead of expensing everything onto the taxpayer's dime, especially in such inflationary cost of living crisis that Canadians are struggling under, thanks to, 10 years now going on 11 of a liberal ruin. But you're making a pretty penny off of the backs of hardworking taxpayers just in salary, not to mention all these extra expenses and compensation. Like pay for your own meal. This is so disgusting and so out of touch. And I mean, whoever he brought with him as an entourage, guaranteed they're making at least 6 figures. Pay for yourself.
Yeah.
You're already getting your free flight.
I don't even care if they pay for it themselves, but just dial back the luxury, please. People are at the food bank. You know what I mean? Have a fish fillet, like have the salmon and some rice. But
you know what I do when I travel is I pack my own charcuterie.
Me too.
Some meat and cheese, and hey, if you want olives and crackers, pack it in a little Tupperware container, and there you have it. Good to go. You can have a full meal when you land.
Yeah, if you smell salami on a flight, it's me. Just look for me. it's me.
There's Sheila with her homemade charcuterie.
All right.
There you go. Or homemade jerky.
Yeah. Yes.
Right.
I do that too. I think we have to wrap up the show, but I just
have
want to
super chat.
Yeah.
I think I don't know where it went.
It's Harambe Remembrance Day.
Oh yeah.
I'm surprised I haven't gotten a text from one of my kids about this, but I did get a message from Holly Nicholas, who used to be a contributor to Rebel News way back in the day. Actually, when Harambe died, I should tell you, at the Cincinnati Zoo, he was shot by a keeper. I think probably they made
because
the
he
right
manhandled
move.
a child that had climbed over the gate.
Right. So, and then the memes came. Just the meme lording happened. And people saw him, sort of pick up the child. But the thing is, if you've ever watched gorillas with their babies, gorillas are really tough on their babies. They'll smack their babies if they're misbehaving, or sort of swing them around and throw them. And it's not that they don't love their babies. I don't know if gorillas love babies or whatever, but they parent their babies, but they don't realize that human babies are not as resilient as gorilla babies. And so one swing of that 3-year-old by that gorilla could have been fatal. It just happened in front of horrified onlookers, and that was the problem. But yeah.
And the White House called him a legend in their Remembrance Day post today. So that was kind of funny, I guess. And then, okay, I know we're a minute over, and we have the Democracy Fund head litigator, Mark Joseph at committee. So I want to just super quickly wrap up with our daily dose of cringe.
Yes.
In case anybody was unaware, it was intersex, I don't know, intersex acknowledgement day yesterday. Was it yesterday? No, May 26th. There was an intersex inclusive progress pride flag raising ceremony at the Mel Lastman Square. What is that, in Mississauga or Toronto somewhere? Anyway.
Toronto, North York. It's right next door to the hotel where we host the student journalism conference.
Yeah, and they opened it. I don't even what are these people even wearing? But they opened it with a land acknowledgement. Yeah, and so here it is. Cringe with us.
Before we begin, I would like to start with a land acknowledgement. I would like to begin by acknowledging the indigenous peoples of all the lands that we are on today, and the importance of the land which we each call home. We do this to reaffirm our commitment and responsibility in improving relationships between nations and to improve our own understanding of local indigenous peoples and their cultures.
There's no one there.
The land I am standing on today is the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples, and is now home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis peoples. I also acknowledge that Toronto is covered by Treaty 13, signed with the Mississaugas of the Credit.
You guys get the drift. Are they supposed to be is that a kiwi? What even are they? A watermelon? What's happening?
I don't know, but once again, it's the boomer gray-haired ladies Somebody come and get your Grammy. Her voting habits are destroying this country.
I forget which counselor. Those are 3 Toronto City councillors: Chris Moyes, Shelley Carroll, and I don't remember the name of the other one. But like, these people are just ruthless in their nonsense.
Like, look at them. This is a very serious group of people, don't you know? My hope is that it was hot that day and they were melting inside those costumes. But
Oh my goodness.
chef's kiss for them giving the "we're standing on the land of the blah 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 blah," but it's actually AstroTurf that they're standing on. Like, it's just perfect.
Come get your tomato. Someone who's
Someone
tomato.
come get your kiwi.
Yeah. If you know what those costumes were, let me know, because I maybe need to take a closer look, but I have no idea. Anyway, okay, stay on for.
We got one cridge from Hutchwoman. Is this April? Is that you, April? $5. Careful, Louis and Marie Antoinette lost their heads over this kind of extravagance. Yes, Carney.
Where are the pitchforks?
Yeah.
Where's the pitchforks when you need them? Anyway,
okay, let's
all
get
right.
here.
Stay on for. We're just going to go right into the stream of the Democracy Fund at Committee. So stay on for that. And thanks everybody for joining us. Until tomorrow, same time and place, 1 to 2 p.m. Eastern. Stay sane and question everything.
Senator Salma Taulajan from Ontario.
Hello, Yana Martin from British Columbia.
Wanda Thomas Bernard, Deputy Chair from Nova Scotia, Mi'kmaq Territory.
Christopher Wells, Alberta, Treaty 6 Territory.
Great, thank you. I now welcome all of you, and welcome to all those who are following our deliberations. Today, our committee is continuing its study on Bill C-9, an act to amend the criminal code, hate propaganda, hate crime, and access to religious or cultural places. Before we welcome our witnesses, I would like to provide a content warning for this meeting. The sensitive topics covered today may be triggering for people in the room with us, as well as for those watching and listening to the broadcast. Mental health support for all Canadians is available by phone and text at 988. That is 988. For those in Ottawa, a crisis line at 613-722-6914 is available. Senators and parliamentary employees are also reminded that the Senate's Employee and Family Assistance Program is also available to them, and that a dedicated phone line has been set up for this session. These phone numbers are provided in handouts around the room. This afternoon, we will have 3 panels. Our witnesses have been asked to make an opening statement of 5 minutes each. This will be followed by questions from the senators. With us online, Regional Chief Terry Teague of the BC Assembly of First Nations. Also online, we welcome Sheila Gunn, Special Rapporteur on Freedom of Religion or Belief from the United Nations. I invite Regional Chief Teague to make his presentation, followed by Ms. Gunn. Over to you, Chief.
Thank you. Good day, Madam Chair and members of the committee. My name is Terry Teague. I am the Regional Chief for the British Columbia Assembly of First Nations and co-portfolio holder and lead for Justice and Policing and the implementation for the Federal United Nations Declaration Act for the Assembly of First Nations. I appear on behalf of the Assembly of First Nations, representing more than 630 nations across this country we call Canada. The AFN supports the intent of Bill C-9 as an important step in addressing the alarming rise in hate-motivated conduct across this country we call Canada. However, the bill must reflect the realities First Nations face, particularly growing anti-Indigenous racism, violence, and rhetoric surrounding the lasting harm of Indian residential schools, also known as IRS system, and the ongoing spread of denialism and hate, which is having real impacts on many First Nations communities and First Nations across this country. My message is quite simple. C9 must align with the United Nations Declaration for the Rights of Indigenous Peoples and be strengthened to reduce unintentional harms and fully protect First Nations peoples, truths, and sacred places. On May 13th, my office sent a letter to the Senate Committee on Human Rights articulating more fully our concerns with Bill's development, critical gaps, and our recommendations for amendments to strengthen the bill. Support for the intent of Bill C9, the AFN supports in principle its goals in strengthening responses to hate propaganda and hate crimes. However, the bill's complete failure to address the rise in anti-Indigenous hate must be addressed. The AFN has identified 3 key gaps that must be addressed. Indian residential school denialism is not explicitly covered. First Nation ceremonial, cultural, and burial sites need stronger protection, including former Indian residential school sites. The bill must not infringe on legitimate First Nations advocacy. Without these changes, the bill risks falling short of addressing lived First Nations realities and Canada's commitments under the United Nations Declaration for the Rights of Indigenous Peoples Act and the Truth and Reconciliation calls to action, and could potentially be used to perpetuate further harm against First Nations peoples. First Nations across the country have noted an exponential rise in violence, hate speech, and anti-Indigenous rhetoric directly linked to the recognition of First Nations rights and title. Many of these actions have been linked to Indian residential school denialism. Indian residential school denialism is not an academic debate. It's quite simply hate speech. It's fact. And it re-traumatizes survivors, harms entire communities, disrespects children who have never returned home, denies historical facts, and undermines truth and reconciliation. If left unaddressed, the gap risks enabling harmful narratives that perpetuate racism, misinformation, and historical erasure. Residential school denialism has also impacted communities directly who are working to uncover the truth about residential schools within their traditional territories. On May 25th, 2026, Cookbee, Roseanne Casimir, and Tecumseh Tissaquatmik testified before the Senate Standing Committee, mind you, March 25th, I should say, on Indigenous peoples, where she highlighted a large number of hateful phone calls received by the band office where individuals have threatened band members and acts of violence in relation to the unannounced of the unmarked burial grave sites at the former Kamloops Indian Residential School. Additionally, some individuals have attempted to exhume the unmarked grave sites by trespassing into Tecumseh Tissaquatmik territory. This has resulted in establishing a 24-hour security and former residential school site. To ensure the safety of the band members and the unmarked grave sites, the bill has a critical opportunity to address the rise in this form of hatred. And certainly this is part of the BCFN and Assembly of First Nations mandate. We have a clear mandate, including motions to calling upon the Senate and government to amend Bill C9. We also advocate for land defenders who are often targeted by upholding those rights and must be protected from misuse of legal provisions. In February of 2025, the BCFN Chiefs of the Assembly passed a resolution 21-2025 call to reject the criminalization of residential school denialism to address the ongoing behavior of elected political leaders in BC who continue to perpetuate denialist rhetoric. In December of 2025, these same concerns were captured with the AFN resolution calling on Canada to criminalize Indian residential school denialism, which specifically called Canada to amend Bill C9. To criminalize the public condoning, denial, justification, or minimizing the Indian residential school system, recognizing denialism as equal to a hate crime against First Nations peoples. And certainly this is a part of the United Nations Declaration Act obligations under Section 5 of the Federal United Nations Declaration Rights of Indigenous Peoples Act, legally obligates the Government of Canada to consult and cooperate with Indigenous peoples to ensure all federal laws are consistent with the UN Declaration. Given the impacts and implications of this bill could have on First Nations peoples, Canada has failed to live up to its own legislated obligations to fully engage First Nations in development of C9. Many of the gaps and deficiencies of the bill could have been addressed in
I'm sorry
Canada
to interrupt.
to
If you could summarize now, that we would really appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you. Bill C9 is could be a missed opportunity for Canada to live up to its obligations under UNDA and to take necessary steps to prevent the continued rise of anti-Indigenous hatred. Parliament must close the gap on our IRS and denialism, protect First Nations sacred places, and ensure that the law does not undermine legitimate advocacy. These changes are essential to advancing reconciliation, upholding human rights, and protecting communities from harm. The BCAFN and also the AFN stand ready to work with Parliament to ensure this legislation is inclusive, equitable, and responsive to realities of all our First Nations communities. Thank you. I welcome any questions later. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Over to Ms. Ganea.
Thank you very much. It's an honor to be with you today. Allow me to focus on mandate observations and in light of both binding international human rights obligations and relevant soft law. I'm going to focus on 2 points. The first is on hate speech, which of course constitutes a subset of hate crimes. The former are public expressions that may call for discrimination, hostility, or violence against a particular group, and the latter reaching the threshold of crimes and motivated by bias towards a specific group. The report I submitted to the UN Human Rights Council on hatred on the basis of religion or belief draws attention to the multifaceted harms that can result from hateful expressions, whether or not they amount to human rights violations or constitute crimes. The report calls on state authorities to be alert to expressions of hatred and ensure appropriate and carefully calibrated measures in response. Criminal liability must always be a last resort and run in parallel with other interventions, preventative, societal, educational, restorative, and other. They must also be multi-sectoral, involving actions, for example, by NGOs, political parties, and civil society actors, including religion or belief communities. Too low a bar for criminalization would not only violate rights, but also prove counterproductive to the objective of making society safer. The soft law international guidance of the Rabat Plan of Action resulted from extensive and extended deliberations at the international level and offers a UN framework focused on preventing advocacy of national, racial, or religious hatred that incites discrimination, hostility, or violence. It distinguishes between permissible freedom of expression, Article 19 of the ICCPR, and Article 20 of ICCPR, so advocacy of national, racial, or religious hatred that constitutes incitement to discrimination, hostility, or violence, and which must be prohibited by law. The Rabat Plan of Action proposes a 6-part threshold test in order to distinguish between Article 19 and 20, therefore prohibition and non-prohibition. So it calls for taking into account of the social and political context, the status of the speaker, the intent to incite an audience against a target group, the content and form of the speech, the extent of its dissemination, and the likelihood of harm, including imminence. The test guides towards a strict and sharp understanding of expression that is to be prohibited. Over broad understandings, of course, restrict and violate rights and freedoms, including freedom of religion or belief, and overly rigid understandings of speech or symbols fixated on content without due consideration, for example, of context, speaker, and intent, will be prone to misguided findings. Symbols can and are hijacked. Hate migrates and adapts. Hence, responses need to be well considered and adapt judiciously to new realities. My second point is on manifestation of religion or belief and possible limitations to it. This is clear in the structure of Article 20 of the ICCPR, which has been binding on Canada since 1976. But of course, freedom of thought, conscience, and religion is also protected in other declarations and treaties, including UNDRIP 12, 5, and other articles. which Chief Hige just addressed. Article 18 makes clear that the right to freely hold and change religion or belief of one's choice should never be interfered with, and there should be no coercion around it. But its manifestation or expressing religion or belief, including in community with others and in public, that can be subject to limitations, but it's strictly laid out in the article when that might be so. It must be prescribed by law, non-discriminatory, absolutely necessary in order to protect public safety, order, health or morals, or the fundamental rights and freedoms of others, with any limitations being strictly proportionate, exercised through the least restrictive measures possible and only on the grounds given. Manifestation of religion or belief includes access to places, for example, for worship and assembly, where holidays and ceremonies are observed, where representatives and leaders of religion or belief communities are trained, materials are held, and funeral rights exercised. And that was the topic of my latest report to the UN Human Rights Council. What is implicitly recognized in Article 18 of the ICCPR is detailed in Article 6 of the 1981 UN Declaration. Protection of access to places of worship, schools, community spaces are recognized as integral to the protection of freedom of religion or belief. And this is also underscored by understanding rights as being mutually reinforcing. To end, as in all instances, understanding the diversity of religion and belief communities, which includes non-religious communities, and the variety of ways in which they manifest their religion or belief and gather, worship, or hold activities will be critical. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Ganea. Thank you both for your statements. We will now proceed to questions from senators. You have 5 minutes, senators, for your question, which also includes the answer. And I will begin with Senator Bernard.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you both for being with us today and for your testimony. My first question is for Mr. Tiji. I wonder if you could please elaborate on your third recommendation. It wasn't totally clear what you were recommending.
Sorry, the third recommendation was to strengthen Bill C-9 with support implementation through education and training. I didn't get into, I was trying to condense my notes. So, but I think, really the intent is to pair legislative reform with culturally informed law enforcement training and public education on First Nations histories, rights, and harms of hate speech, because certainly here, if we're talking about sharing and also our shared history, I suppose, but also our history even before colonization, but also this issue about in residential school, how it has implications afterwards of, the long history of residential schools. Certainly bleeds into other institutions such as policing. We've seen a high death rate in terms of, and high incarceration rates, as well as high rates of injury by police forces. So that is an example, is to share more information, and also within education institutions about Indian residential schools. But also I think it goes beyond that, is about a history. For example, here in Clayton, the Dakat people, the long history even before Simon Fraser came up here, before the first governor Douglas who came up here. There was a history before that, which is hundreds, matter of fact, thousands of years. That kind of history needs to be shared, about the true history of parts of British Columbia and Canada that need to be shared, about I think about the true history of First Nations. Without truth, as Murray Sinclair stated, you can't have reconciliation. And I think that needs to be shared amongst all citizens of Canada.
Thank you. So
Senator, we'll now proceed to Senator Ince. No, you did not. You still have 2.5 minutes. So I thought you were done.
We had.
Okay.
I was looking to make sure I had more time.
Oh, you do.
Thank you. A follow-up for Mr. Tiji. So we've heard that dehumanization can lay the groundwork for hatred and violence. Could you tell us from your perspective, how does residential school denialism contribute to the ongoing dehumanization of Indigenous peoples, and why you believe addressing it is a necessary part of this legislation to combat hate? And I'd also like you to ask, if we have time to get the answer in, whether or not was your organization consulted as this bill was being developed? Thank you.
In terms of consultation, we have been aware. I don't think we've been deeply consulted about Bill C9, but getting back to the dehumanization and about Indian residential school and about the rise in anti-Indigenous rhetoric, especially in regards to, this Monday was the 5th anniversary of the announcement of the finding of 215 anomalies that could be 215 graves. We know for a fact that there were grave sites at all Indian residential schools. Matter of fact, if you look at a plan, there's a playground, there's a school, there's a field, and then there's a graveyard. And the fact remains is that how did these children die? There's different ways that they've died over the last 100 years of, let's be clear, this was genocidal policy. If you look at the United Nations definition of genocide, it's, taking away of children, it's breaking up the families, it's also taking their language and their culture away. So really dehumanizing our Indigenous children for over 100 years, and the intent from Sir John A. Macdonald, our Prime Minister, was to kill the Indian and the child, and certainly he did that over generations of residential school. So now we have the fact that there are graves at these sites, at the Indian residential schools, and whether they're exhumed or whether they're repatriated back to their families or their communities is not the point. I really think we need to take a whole picture that over 100 years, their children were taken away, they were dehumanized, they were abused. There were well over 4,000, the number is probably even higher, of missing children. And where did they go? Most of them died either trying to escape, or most of them died and were placed in some of these graves. And quite simply, those are the facts and those are the truths. And one thing that we're really trying to get to the bottom of is with the government of Canada, with all the churches, and with the Vatican, is to get a clear information of the data and of the information of those children that are missing, and potentially of who potentially are in these graves, because there's a lot of missing information with some of these residential schools. And here in British Columbia, we have 18 residential schools, and there's much more than that, as we well know. And some, such as residential school in Northwest Territories, St. Joseph's, where a child was exhumed, they knew who the grave was, and was repatriated back to the family. But the point was, how did he die? When did he die? Was it cause of malnutrition, abuse, sickness, et cetera, and that's the dehumanization of our children that go into residential school.
Thank you very much. That is time. We'll now go to Senator Ince.
Thank you so much, and thank you all for being here. Thank you, Madam Chair. My question is for Chief Teague. Last week, we heard from the Métis National Council, the Anishinaabe Nation, and the Chiefs of Ontario that their communities were not consulted during the development of this bill. Now, let me just go back and clarify. They may have been consulted on the first iteration of the bill. I'm asking, were the communities, and was your community consulted during this iteration of C9? And if not, what immediate steps should the government take to correct the exclusion of Indigenous perspectives?
Well, two things. Thanks for the question. Two things there is that not only on this bill of C9, I'm also, as part of the United Nations Declaration Act on behalf of AFN, is to align many of the laws with UNDA. First and foremost, we have been aware of this legislation, and we have been sharing a lot of our information, not only our motions, resolutions, BCAFN, and the AFN more recently this past year. But the point is that Our recommendation since the passing of the United Nations Declaration Act, my recommendation was that with any bill that's in development, we should be consulted at the first point that the bill comes forward. And there should be an opportunity. And I think that this bill, is a perfect opportunity to align with the United Nations Declaration Act. Seeing that it is, being amended right now, here's a perfect opportunity for this to be make amendments to align with the United Nations Declaration Act, considering all of the implications that you heard from myself and fellow witness Nazila about, many issues that we experience as First Nations people in this country.
Thank you. I'm good.
Good, great, thank you. We'll now go to Senator Martin.
Okay, thank you, Chair. Thank you to our witnesses today and the insights that you bring. So my first few questions will be for Ms. Ganea. So from your perspective as a special rapporteur, very important role, and you get to see various situations. How important is it under international standards on freedom of religion or belief? And as you say, these are important standards that Canada is signatory to, as well as other countries. So how important is it that criminal hate speech laws include clear and explicit safeguards for good faith religious expression? And in that light, how should we as parliamentarians at this time think about the decision to remove a long-standing religious text defense in Bill C-9 and rely instead on more general wording and charter protection? So would you speak to that, the removal of that protection?
Thank you very much. What is clear in international standards is that the right to have, adopt, and change religion or belief must be free, there must be no intrusion on it, and there must be no coercion about it. So the question that you raise is not explicit in the international standards, but the coercive element is something that we need to be mindful of. So and it's very clear from the UN Human Rights Committee that coercion can be in the socio-economic field, not just the civil and political field. We're not just talking about apostasy or a prohibition on the change of religion or belief. The whole environment around having and holding a religion or belief of one's choice must be free without any coercive influences. It also relates, of course, to Article 19, which is on freedom of opinion and expression, in addition to relating to Article 18 on freedom of religion or belief, but also freedom of association and assembly. What might be very interesting to consider is that the UN Human Rights Committee is currently redrafting an article on freedom of assembly and association. And to that redrafting process, the Special Rapporteur on Countering Terrorism, the Special Rapporteur on Freedom of Assembly and Association, the Working Group on Discrimination Against Women and Girls, as well as this mandate, we have all submitted to that. So I want to repeat, freedom of expression is a necessary right within freedom of religion or belief. Freedom of religion or belief must be also in public and alongside others. There must be a level of autonomy within religion or belief communities in order to be able to maintain, to perpetuate, to share, to teach their religion or belief. And of course, in many instances, the most vulnerable victims of freedom of religion or belief violations are intersectional, and they may be minorities or indeed indigenous peoples, or they may hold religions or beliefs of African origin. So I want to recall that all of these rights should stand together, and there should be no interference in freedom of expression unless it is necessary to the protection of the rights and freedoms of others.
Okay, so just following that, the removal of this long-standing good faith religious text defense has really already caused great concern across our country, and I've heard from witnesses who have appeared at this committee as well. And it has that chilling effect, and we talk about what it may do as a result of that removal on lawful religious teaching and public moral debate. And in a pluralistic society like ours, how important it is for people to have that real sense of freedom and protection. So drawing on your comparative experience, what kinds of legislative wording or implementation practices most often lead to that chilling effect? And what concrete safeguards are needed in the bill that we are studying at this time?
We have about less than 10 seconds for that.
Okay.
I will give her a minute and see if she can handle it in a minute.
Okay, thank you.
Reflecting on it from a global perspective, it is absolutely essential that popularity, populism, majority sentiment and preference should have nothing to do with it. If there is any restriction to the speech, or indeed you're talking about manifestation of religion or belief. If there is any restriction on it, it must be non-discriminatory. It must be, yes, it will be in this case, it would potentially be established in law. But can we guarantee that it will be the least intrusive measure and that it will be absolutely non-discriminatory in its implementation? I think, Senator Martin, you want me to say that we should keep it. I just want to reflect that there isn't a good faith protection. It's not explicit in international standards, but we must be very mindful that any limitations must be strictly because we need to uphold the rights and freedoms of others. And it's the least intrusive means that we are using, and it must be proportionate.
Thank you. We'll now proceed to Senator Arnold.
Merci, Madame la Présidente.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Ms. Gania, I really appreciated your methodical approach to assessing hate speech, and that's a really helpful framework, so thank you for that. And you addressed so much of the parallel work that must be done to accompany what has often been referred to as, this blunt instrument of legislation. So I'm wondering if you have any positive, tangible examples of situations in which different faith groups have come together and had meaningful dialogue and positive outcomes as a result of that.
I think you're referring to the early part of the comments. So it's an opportunity to reiterate that criminalization must be a last resort and prevention must be preferred to criminalization. It is only when it's absolutely necessary and it's reaches a very high threshold that there should be any consideration of any restrictions. So prevention at the grassroots, good relations at the grassroots, having ongoing dialogue, authorities being in touch with the variety of religion or belief communities that, will always be changing. The landscape of our countries is always changing in terms of religiosity, non-religiosity in different religions or beliefs. So those interactions, good relations, ongoing debates. As I go on country visits around the world, I often emphasize that it's not only at a moment of crisis that we should reach out to religion and belief communities. It should be ongoing in order for there to be trust within and religion or belief communities, but also with religion or belief communities and the authorities.
Okay, thank you. We'll now go to Senator Wells.
Great, thank you. I want to keep the line of questioning with our current witness, Ms. Guinea. I just wanted to see if I heard you correctly when you said there is no international standard for a faith-based religious defense. Was that correct?
It is not as sharply crafted as it has been in Canada. But what is guaranteed is that their freedom of expression and freedom of religion or belief are interrelated, and freedom of religion or belief without the expressive elements is meaningless. Otherwise, we're privatizing it. So it is guaranteed, but it's not articulated in the way that Canadian law has been. That's what I wanted to say. But as I mentioned, manifestation of religion or belief has a very strict framework and must be supervised very carefully. And the Rabat plan of action is really helpful to us because it goes beyond merely looking at the content of the speech.
Great. That sounds like you're describing our Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms. Do you feel C9 in its current form meets the international obligations you've identified?
I appreciate recognition of places associated with manifestation of religion or belief. So I think it is essential to recognizing the fact that religion or belief is also in public and with others. When it comes to the terrorism definition and criminalization, there are other UN special rapporteurs that I would recommend have a sharper focus on that. But I would draw attention to the submission of the UN special rapporteur on upholding human rights while countering terrorism to the UN Human Rights Committee for his extensive discussion about how carefully terrorism needs to be drafted.
I'm not quite sure I got the answer to the question I was looking for. Maybe I'll put it a different way for you. Do you feel
Please.
that Bill C9 does not meet any of those specific international obligations?
Sorry, I thought you meant the amendments. Apologies. So in regard to the amendments regarding terrorism, I just wanted to say that my expertise is not sufficient for that. With regards to C9,
sorry to interrupt.
I think...
I mean Bill C9 in its entirety. Are there... Or do you see specific parts of Bill C9 that do not meet those international requirements that you've outlined to us? Not in generalities,
No,
but in specific relation to the bill.
No, but when it comes to the amendments regarding symbols, I think it's advisable to allow there to be reconsideration of what the symbols mean over time.
In that sense, you're saying that section on symbols isn't sufficient to the international regulations that you've outlined? I'm a bit confused.
I'm suggesting that there needs to be care in its implementation. I'm not criticizing the amendment as it stands, but it needs to be reconsidered. I saw one of the submissions suggested a 5-year review of it, and I think that's wise in terms of how it is realized and implemented. Thank you.
Thank you. I appreciate the clarifications. Very helpful. My question, if I have time? Okay. For Chief TG, a few days ago, the Department of Justice officials provided some assurance that unmarked grave sites at former residential schools and ancestral Indigenous burial sites could be considered as, quote-unquote, cemetery as identified in Bill C9. Does that reassure you?
Well, I think it's much more than just the grave sites. I think it's just the First Nations experience in terms of hate speech, but also beyond hate speech. I think it's getting quite difficult. I've never, just in my opinion, I've been a chief for 17 years. I've never seen it this bad. We get a lot of message here at the BCFN, personally, social media, and in general public, sadly. Where we're hearing anti-hate speech, and it's only getting worse. And I think we need to call it out, and I think it needs to be criminalized because, quite simply, you wouldn't see that with. You would see implications and also perhaps consequences if it was anti-Semitic speech.
Thank you.
Thank you. We'll now go to Senator Simons.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. My first question is for Ms. Ganea. In your opening remarks, you talked about the necessity to view hate speech in context based on the social position of the person making the speech and other social elements. And I'm just wondering if you could take a minute more to explain to us how ideally those factors would intertwine.
I'd be very happy to also share case law from around the world, evolving case law that refers to the Rabat Plan of Action and benefits from it. A recent example being regarding the response of the Swedish authorities to the burning of holy books. But why does it matter? It matters because sometimes the speaker does not, with the Rabat Plan of Action, we're talking about a speaker who influences an audience to act against a target because of their indigeneity, because of their race, or because of their religion. It's that triangular relationship. And so the speaker matters, the context matters. We can't just look, of course, at the content of something and decide that this is so grave that it merits criminalization. So that's what I meant by the speaker. If you recall, about 15 years ago, Pastor Jones had a congregation of 12, but the case of the Quran burning, which of course is very hurtful, but the case became notorious around the world. So sometimes we need to consider whether we give attention to a speaker who does not have a following, and we bring them fame and attention.
So you create a free speech martyr and give them a platform and a global audience that maybe they didn't have before.
Indeed.
One of the other challenges of this legislation is that Canada doesn't have a list of prescribed symbols. So what the government has done instead is to use the list of terrorist entities as a proxy. And this has created some challenges because there are some symbols on that list that are not hate symbols. And there are some hate symbols that have been left out entirely. So could you talk a little bit about how some other countries have done that? Because as I say, I'm not really comfortable with the way that we've used a list that was created for a completely different purpose as a simulacrum of a list of hate symbols.
I'm afraid I'm not fully informed or knowledgeable about the terrorism symbol aspect of it, and I suggest Ben Saul would be better able to advise on that. But if we look historically, of course, we have the Nazi symbol, which is originally a Hindu symbol, which was auspicious and spiritual and was a symbol of good fortune, and then it becomes distorted and used in this horrible and disturbing way. So we have the lessons of history, and I don't know of any other democratic countries, this might be my ignorance, I don't know of any other democratic countries that have singled out religious symbols that must be prohibited. The terrorism side, I must defer to Ben Saul.
Thank you, Senator. Before I do go to second round, are there any more questions in first round? Okay, your second round, you're noted for that. Before it, so I'll go to Senator McFedrin. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. And thank you to the witnesses that have come to us today. I want to pay particular tribute to the UN Special Rapporteurs. I've done some work in the UN system, and I have some appreciation of the amount of generous sharing of your expertise that this position requires of you. So thank you for that. My question is actually geared to Chief Tiji, please. And in some ways, I've been asked to raise this. Not able to be with us today as a member of this committee, who is the only residential school survivor in the Senate of Canada at this point in time. She's encouraged me to give her name, which is Senator Mary Jane McCollum, a sister senator of mine from Manitoba. She framed this question primarily as a residential school survivor. And while she absolutely shares the concern of the level of rising hate speech, hate crimes against Indigenous people, one of the points that she's raised and that she's asked me to raise here is a concern that for many survivors of the residential school system, there's a deeply internalized form of hate that they have been taught, and it has been drilled into their very beings. And one of her concerns is that this could potentially have the criminalization of hate speech could potentially get weaponized against actually residential school survivors. And I wondered if you wanted to comment on that. I hope I've done adequate service here for Senator McCollum's concern.
Yeah, certainly, and I totally respect Senator McCollum and her question, and certainly that is a potential, I suppose, issue. And I don't want to trivialize it because, quite simply, I was lucky enough not to attend residential school, and my older siblings were in residential school, and certainly know of the internal, I suppose, dehumanization, hate that internalized. And I think, it's perhaps, one of these issues where there needs to be more consultation, perhaps. And I think in the end, though, the fact remains is that what we're talking about here is not only the residential school survivors, it's what has come as a result of not only Indian residential schools. It's the current state of affairs, as Senator McCollum noted, and I just noted previous question that we've seen a rise of hate in the last couple of years, especially last couple of years, because quite simply, in my opinion, I suppose, was what we're seeing from south to the United States, that many of those have similar minds, have emboldened themselves to not only question the issue of denialism, but they're questioning rights, title, and interests of First Nations peoples. It's political parties, such as the one party in British Columbia, a member of the Legislative Assembly, Dallas Brody, coming out and stating that not only such as the Cowichan case or the Chatla case and title is being questioned, the fact remains is that this bleeds into other things, I suppose. And that is really what we need to call out in terms of the hate speech that we're experiencing here in British Columbia and certainly elsewhere. I know there's a decision about title in New Brunswick today, but it speaks to the ongoing issue that all First Nations experience in this country, and the anti-hate denialism is bleeding into other things, which is a real problem. And it's not just bleeding into general public; it's bleeding into political parties. What we're hearing from One BC, what we're hearing from the Conservatives, and really, I think. The repeal push to repeal here in British Columbia, DRIPA, and also the United Nations Declaration Act is a real concern, considering, the great strides that we've taken. It's really creating, discourse and perhaps a strained relationship with governments, and I would say with the general public. So we're totally, we're taking recommendations from residential school survivors, also the Truth and Reconciliation Commission and elsewhere, that we need to make sure that this is certainly a C9 aligns with, once again, with the United Nations Declaration of Rights of Indigenous Peoples Act federally. And here's a good opportunity for that. So I'll leave it there.
Thank you. We will now go to second round. Senator Ince.
Thank you so much. Ms. Ganea, in your report titled A Call for Input, Advocacy, and Hatred Based on Religion or Belief, Transformative Responses, you've highlighted that the effectiveness of criminalization of hate speech may be limited. Thus, you've proposed in the report 10 different transformative approaches to address root causes, such as the creation of collaborative networks to build mutual understanding, encouraging training of government officials in effective outreach strategies, and understanding the need to combat denigration by strategizing actions to local and national levels through education and awareness building. Moreover, based on your discussions with the United Nations member states, what are some effective approaches they use to address hate crimes that candidates bill can learn from?
2 minutes for that, please.
Thank you very much for that question. Speaking to an international human rights audience and speaking to 193 states is very different to this current context. So I just want to first suggest that I'm not at polar opposites to Chief Tiji on this matter. When there is structural discrimination, when there is a history of violations, when people's humanity has been denigrated for centuries, the approach needs to put attention on equalizing, to allowing equal enjoyment of human rights fully and equally, without any implicit bias, without any structural discrimination hindering the reality of their access to human rights. So that is absolutely necessary and is sort of a different part of this debate. Then when speaking to 193 states, some of whom prohibit particular religions, don't recognize that religion or belief applies to women on an equal basis, so half of humanity, that have a list of recognized religions, and it happens to be the people who are in power. It's not only of a religion, but a particular sect or a particular approach of a particular religion. So obviously in that audience, I'm speaking about don't criminalize too easily. But we know from the ICCPR that criminalization and prohibition of speech is also in the toolbox and is a necessary part of the toolbox. Article 20, Part 2 of the ICCPR requires prohibition. But when we take on board the global reality, we don't want it to be the first resort, especially when that first resort of criminalization in many contexts will go with the mandatory death penalty. Okay, so let's just look at the broader reality which those international standards needs to meet.
Thank you.
So let me just say that I stand by the fact that those other measures are absolutely necessary, but that doesn't preclude the necessity of criminalization. The state has positive duties to ensure these rights are actually enjoyed by everybody in society on an equal basis.
Thank you. Thank you. We'll now go to Senator Simons. 3 minutes.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Chief Tiji, believe me, as an Alberta senator, I understand what you're saying about the dangers of politicians inciting hatred against Indigenous communities. And certainly in Alberta, in the wake of the referendum decision, there's been a lot of concern in the Indigenous community about backlash. And I'm also very cognizant of the fact, as a person of Jewish descent, of the danger of denying the Holocaust and of denying residential schools. But here's my concern, and I wondered if you could speak to this. You talked about the need for education and better education around the history of residential schools. I'm worried that if we were to do, as some have suggested, and criminalize the diminution of residential schools, that we could actually create such a backlash that, right-wing people who deny the meaning of residential schools would be empowered, that they would be able to, that the results would be catastrophic in a way that education would not be. So I'm just wondering if you can talk a little bit about whether it makes more sense to advocate for better education or to criminalize debate about the reality of residential schools.
Well, I think, not delving too much into the debate portion, because that's new and novel to me right now. But realizing that, and I appreciate yourself being from Alberta, the total civil discourse that we're seeing in terms of premier that is basically capitulating to a small sect of the public in Alberta to separate and ignoring and challenging Section 35 rights and treaty rights of those treaty nations in Historical Treaty 678 and the Blackfoot Confederacy. Certainly support those First Nations and fully support the nations that have a right to say what occurs in Alberta. Now, in terms of the backlash, I mean, it's already happening. We need to do something in terms of, stemming the tide of what we're seeing right now. Perhaps right now what we're seeing and what you're experiencing in Alberta and perhaps we're experiencing here in British Columbia because of the Cowichan case and the Gitgala-Hedisat case is ground zero. But we're seeing it elsewhere as well. Perhaps, there's going to be discussion about the recent decision from judges today on the title case in New Brunswick. We have issues in regards to racism and the rhetoric we're hearing on fishing rights that has been ongoing for quite some time on the East Coast and now in the West Coast here as part of decisions on the salmon allocation policy. My point being is that not only is it in denialism, it's also bleeding elsewhere, as I stated earlier. So I think certainly I think we could do education is a really important aspect, and we've been doing our best with local educational institutions, high schools, elementary schools, and perhaps universities, and that's really important. To make sure that the information about the truth of the history of Canada is out there.
Thank you
I
very
think
much. Perhaps
the criminalization of what you recommended there should be looked at more thoroughly.
Thank you, Chief. I do have Senator McFadden's second round, but Senator Carter-Glindale would like to ask a question. I'd like to give you the last question instead. Thank you.
Thank you so much. To Chief Teague. One of the witnesses, or maybe more than one, talked about how this legislation doesn't necessarily cover areas that do not have a physical place, like cultural sites and sacred places. Do you feel this legislation would protect those, or do you think amendments are needed to protect non-physical churches, temples, but more cultural sites where people gather and worship or do their cultural practices? Thank you.
I think what the bill's purpose is to stem this tide of behavior and certainly desecration of sites of graves that we've seen and experienced in this country. Criminalizing I would say this covers off that in terms of protecting sacred sites. And the point being is that the issue is the overall treatment of Indigenous peoples. And certainly part of denialism is the residential school survivors is within the First Nations experience. I think if we can make amendments then align this legislation with the United Nations Declaration Act, it would definitely help in terms of our relations with the general public. And also, I would think and I would hope that this would change the behavior of those bad actors, if you will, of those racist notions of the racist rhetoric that we're hearing as a result of not only just denialism but elsewhere, which certainly affects perhaps residential school sites, graves, and we've seen a lot of graffiti out there. At the start, as my colleague has stated, the use of the swastika, that is one of the important symbols of anti-Semitism, and certainly we've seen that on many I suppose cultural significant murals and whatnot, that it's being covered up and or desecrated. So I think it's much more than just certain sites and certain areas that we call sacred. I think we're trying to stem the tide of this racist rhetoric that we're all experiencing.
Thank you.
Thank you, Senators, and thank you as well to our witnesses. I would sincerely like to just express our appreciation for your participation in this meeting today. Your assistance with our study as we continue to consider the bill is most appreciated. I will now suspend this meeting briefly while we get ready for our next panel.
Thank you.
Senators, we are resumed for our second panel. Our witnesses have been asked to make an opening statement of 5 minutes each. This will be followed by questions from senators. With us in person from the Democracy Fund, please welcome Mark Joseph, Director of Litigation. Next, we welcome Lisa Bildy, lawyer and executive director from the Free Speech Union of Canada. And finally, we have James Manson, senior lawyer, Charter Advocates Canada. I invite Mr. Joseph to make his presentation, followed by Ms. Bildy, and concluding with Mr. Manson. Over to you.
Thank you. Good afternoon. My name is Mark Joseph. I'm the Executive Director at the Democracy Fund. We are a nonpartisan Canadian charity that provides free legal representation to Canadians whose civil liberties have been violated by the state. Since its founding in 2021, TDF has defended over 2,500 Canadians of every background, religion, race, political persuasion, walk of life. I want to begin there with who TDF actually defends, because it's the foundation of everything that follows. TDF defended dozens of clients charged with criminal mischief during the convoy protests. We defended a client charged under Section 319 for posing a link to a video critical of gender reassignment surgery. We are defending a pastor charged under Section 175 for peaceful street preaching. And we represented a woman invited to speak to a BC Community Centre on gender identity and women's rights, only for the centre to cancel her event on the grounds that her speech might promote hatred, precisely the type of conduct this bill seeks to criminalize. Based on that experience, we predict that Bill C-9, if passed without amendment, will produce more prosecution for speech crimes and peaceful protest, target dissidents, journalists, academics, religious minorities, and peaceful protesters. It will consume scarce judicial resources that would otherwise be used to prosecute serious violent crime. So I want to move on to the specific concerns. First, the hate symbol provisions. Bill C-9 criminalizes the display of Nazi symbols and symbols of listed terrorist entities. We understand the impulse here, but this conduct is already captured by Sections 319 and 83.18 of the Criminal Code. The new offenses add nothing except complicity. More troubling, the terrorist entities list is compiled by the Governor and Council with no meaningful judicial oversight. Parliament could hand the executive the power to ban symbols by regulation. A future government could list communist organizations and ban the hammer and sickle, or list anti-racism groups and criminalize their insignia. TDF recommends that the Senate remove or limit this provision. Second, removal of the religious defense. Currently, an individual charged under Section 319 can raise the religious defense, a good faith argument grounded in sincerely held religious belief. Supreme Court in R.V. Keekstra affirmed this defense as essential to preventing overbroad application of hate speech laws. Bill C-9 rescinds it. Think about who this affects. Orthodox Jews interpreting the Torah on marriage and sexuality, evangelical Christians preaching from the New Testament, conservative Muslims reciting Friday prayers on gender and interfaith relations, dissidents within their own religious communities who hold heterodox views. The men and women TDF defends. Without the religious defense, Crown and Town attorneys and judges must engage in scriptural interpretation, a discipline with thousands of years of scholarly debate that the criminal justice system is wholly unequipped to resolve. Any pattern of prosecution or non-prosecution of particular religious communities will be perceived as persecution or privilege. Both outcomes undermine confidence in the administration of justice and deepen social conflict. TDF recommends the Senate restore the religious defense. Third, the new hate-motivated offenses. Bill C-9 creates a standalone offense under Section 320.1001 for any offense under the Criminal Code or any act of Parliament motivated by hatred. The phrase any act of Parliament captures even minor federal administrative violations. For example, littering in a national park while distributing hateful material could become a predicate for a serious criminal charge. Existing jurisprudence under Section 718.2 requires only partial hateful motivation for enhanced penalties. And from direct experience, we know prosecutors already over-rely on weak evidence of hatred. This provision will multiply charges and divert resources from violent crime prosecutions. It is also unclear whether Section 718.2, that's the enhancements for hate motivation, and Section 320.1001 could both apply to the same conduct. An interaction Parliament has left entirely unaddressed. TDF recommends removing the words any act of Parliament and clarifying that interaction. Fourth, my last point, the obstruction and intimidation offenses. Bill C-9 creates new offenses for intimidating or obstructing access to religious buildings, cultural centers, education institutions, etc. This instinct is understandable, but this conduct is already a crime under Section 430, 175, 176, and 423 of the Criminal Code. TDF lawyers have defended clients charged under these variant sections. Police and prosecutors know these sections and they use them. The new provisions simply create a second charge to stack on top of an existing one. A protester outside a community center could simultaneously face mischief, obstruction of an enumerated building, and then 2 hate-motivated offenses under Section 320.1001, all for the same act of standing on a road. None of the key terms are defined, guaranteeing years of appeals and an immediate chilling effect on lawful protest. TDF recommends removing these offenses as superfluous. Finally, the evidence from established democracies is that censorship does not reduce social conflict. It may, in fact, increase it. Suppressing expression drives police underground, removes the possibility of counterargument, breeds resentment, and over time produces a credulous citizenry more susceptible to demagoguery, not less. Our recommendations are
Would you mind summarizing now, Mr. Joseph?
Sure. Police and prosecutors already have the tools to prosecute the conduct this bill targets. What Bill C-9 adds is not protection, it's exposure for the dissident, the preacher, the peaceful protester, and the minority believer. Thank you.
We'll now go to Ms. Bildy.
Good afternoon, Senators, and thank you for the invitation. My name is Lisa Bildy, and I'm the Executive Director of the Free Speech Union of Canada. We are a nonpartisan, membership-based organization dedicated to defending freedom of expression. The FSUC's submissions are focused on the deleterious impact of Bill C-9 that Bill C-9 would have on expressive rights. I will touch on a few of those concerns, first with respect to hate symbols. Symbols are a form of expression. Criminalizing them is an extraordinary step, and this bill does so in a way that is opaque, vague, and prone to politicization. There is no statutory list of prohibited symbols. Instead, the definition depends on association with whatever groups the Minister of Public Safety has placed on a terrorist list. That makes the scope of criminalized expression inherently political. Most listed groups do not have recognizable symbols. There is no requirement that a symbol be notorious, widely understood, or uniquely associated with a terrorist entity. A person could face prosecution for displaying a symbol at a protest without knowing it has been co-opted by a listed group. As drafted, it appears that the act of displaying the symbol is all that is necessary to establish the willful promotion of hatred. That is incredibly overbroad. While there is an exception for legitimate purposes, it doesn't permit symbolic co-option for legitimate political expression. For example, a meme sometimes seen online places 4 of the Progress Pride flags in such a manner that the triangles resemble a Nazi Hakenkreuz. Identifiable groups. This abandons the content-neutral principles that protect expressive freedom. Some topics of protest will be disproportionately restricted, and Canadians may find themselves unable to criticize protected ideologies in locations where their protest would have the most impact and relevance. The breadth and subjectivity of these provisions serve another purpose. They give authorities flexible tools to deploy against unpopular protests or political opponents. We have already seen selective enforcement in recent years. Some hatred is tolerated, other hatred is punished. That is not the rule of law. As philosopher Bertrand Russell rather cynically observed, people seem good while they are oppressed, but they only wish to become oppressors in their turn. That dynamic was evident in earlier panels calling for the bill to go even further. The impulse is not merely to stop hate, as if one could stop a basic human emotion, but to stop criticism, offense, dissent, and even factual disagreement. Criminalizing denialism of contested perspectives, whether on residential schools, gender ideology, or critical race theory, is a road Canada must not go down. We must hold fast to foundational principles, especially in polarized times. Those are what ground us. Freedom of expression is one of them, and it matters because it is the most effective check on abuses of power. It enables the search for truth, even when truth is uncomfortable. It provides a peaceful outlet for grievances, reducing the risk of violence. It exposes bad ideas to scrutiny, allowing society to challenge and defeat them. Neutral principles protect everyone. As Minister Fraser acknowledged last week here, these tools could easily be used against environmentalists or other activists when political winds shift. It fosters dialogue and social cohesion. Criminal law cannot manufacture harmony. Only open debate and dialogue can. Bill C-9 risks eroding Canadians' most fundamental freedom. Criminal law should target conduct, not expression, violence, not dissent, and incitement, not unpopular opinion. Our specific amendments and more detailed commentary are contained in our written brief. Thank you, and I welcome your questions.
Thank you, Ms. Bildy. We'll now go to Mr. Manson.
Thank you, Senators, Madam Chair. And let me say that Charter Advocates Canada is very pleased to be here to participate in this exercise today. In the interest of time, I'm going to leave our description of Charter Advocates Canada to our written submissions. I hope that everybody has had a chance to look at them, and I certainly commend the written submissions to you, Senators. Suffice to say that Charter Advocates Canada is also a legal charity. We are a not-for-profit organization, and our mandate is to provide pro bono legal services to Canadians in connection with constitutional rights, human rights, civil rights, and other protections under the Canadian Constitution. We represent them in the courts, we represent them before tribunals, and we provide governmental interaction as well. So we have in our written submissions, Senators, 4 broad categories of concern with Bill C-9. And I want to leave 3 of them to the written submissions. I echo my friends here beside me with respect to what they've said with respect to 3 of the 4 areas of concern. And certainly we develop those points in our written submissions. But in the interest of time, what I would like to focus on is the religious defense concern. This is front and center in our document, Senators. And what we're talking about, of course, when we see the bill here, is the idea of repealing what we call in our brief the religious defense. And so that is currently located at 319 sub 3 sub B and 319 3.1 sub B of the Criminal Code. So as I'm sure everybody's aware, 319 sub 3 sub B provides that if in good faith an accused person attempts to expresses or attempts to establish by an argument an opinion on a religious subject or an opinion based on a belief in a religious text, then that accused person can escape criminal liability. That's a defense. Now, of course, this bill, Bill C-9, proposes to remove that defense. Senators, if I leave you with one point today, it's as follows. Charter Advocates Canada does oppose removing the religious defense from the bill, and here's why. In our submission, the religious defense is an integral part of the constitutional balance that was struck by the Supreme Court in the seminal case of R.V. Keegstra. This is back in 1990. I'm sure that, Senators, you're all aware of Keegstra. It's a landmark case in our jurisprudence. And what happened in Keegstra was, of course, the constitutionality of the willful promotion of hatred offense was considered by the court. And it was a very close ruling, as you may recall. It was a 4-3 decision. The dissenting opinion was to strike down the provision itself entirely because it was too great an incursion into the freedom of expression. So the dissent would have struck down this provision at all, and the majority, as I'm sure the senators are aware, upheld the section. So it was a very narrow majority. And what happened was, in Keegstra, the majority considered, among other things, these defenses that we're talking about, including this religious defense that I just mentioned. There are, in fact, 4 of them, as I'm sure you're aware, Senators, and this was one of the 4. And what I want to just focus in on here is that the majority of the court in Keegstra held that these 4 defenses together significantly helped reduce the danger that 319 sub 2, the willful promotion of hatred offense, could be construed as overbroad. They were addressing the overbroad or the unduly vague concern. And this is what Chief Justice Dixon said in Keegstra, and I think it's important to literally quote what he said. He said this: a careful reading of the section 319 sub 3 defenses shows them to take in examples of expressive activity that generally would not fall within the willful promotion of hatred, as I have defined the phrase. Thus, the three defenses, which include elements of good faith or honest belief, namely 319 sub 3 sub B, C, and D, would seem to operate to negate directly the mens rea in the offense. For only rarely will one who intends to promote hatred be acting in good faith or upon honest belief. These defenses are hence intended to aid in making the scope of the willful promotion of hatred more explicit. Individuals engaging in the type of expression described are thus given a strong signal that their activity will not be swept into the ambit of the offense. The result is that what danger exists that Section 319 sub 2 is overbroad or unduly vague, or will be perceived as such, is significantly reduced. To the extent that Section 319 sub 3 provides justification for the accused who would otherwise fall within the parameters of the offense of willfully promoting hatred, it reflects a commitment to the idea that an individual's freedom of expression will not be curtailed in borderline cases. The line between the rough and tumble of public debate and brutal, negative, and damaging attacks upon identifiable groups is hence adjusted in order to give some leeway to freedom of expression.
Mr. Manson, that is time.
Thank you. And what I will wrap up and say is that to remove this defense, senators, calls back into question the very constitutionality of 319 sub 2 itself. It's potentially counterproductive.
Thank you.
I'll take your questions. Thank you.
We'll now move to questions from senators, starting with Senator Bernard.
Thank you to the three witnesses for being here today. My first question is for Mr. Joseph. In your opening remarks, you focus on the risk that Bill C-9 may capture protected expression. Are there specific amendments that would allow you to support the bill's objective of protecting communities from hate and intimidation? Or is it your position that criminal law is not an appropriate tool in this area at all? And we've heard from a number of witnesses, for example, who are saying that education may be a better tool.
Yeah, that's a great question. We're kind of in the trenches with this type of these type of criminal offenses, and so our position is it's already covered. The worst of this stuff is already covered. So, of course, you're going to want to educate your population, but part of doing that is exposing them to some of this stuff, because they have to have reasons for holding the position they do, that this speech is, or these hateful positions are bad. And so in order to reach those positions, they have to engage in the rough and tumble of grappling with terrible speech. And so they're more resilient, right? It's kind of an anti-fragile position. So I guess we'd say that this stuff is already covered, and you're asking the courts to do things that they struggle to do. They have to judge speech instead of conduct, and that we've seen that over the 20, 30 years that they really struggle to do it. So you get inconsistent results, and then you get an increase in social conflict because people say, how come he got charged and this other person didn't, et cetera, et cetera. So I hope that answers your question.
Thank you. I have more time, Chair? Yes. So the next question is for Mr. Joseph and Ms. Bildy. You both referenced the symbols in your testimony, and I'd like to ask about the symbols. Some witnesses have said if this bill goes forward, it should be without any symbols at all. We've also heard very strongly from some witnesses that the list of symbols is incomplete. And in particular, we've heard that the symbols that relate particularly to anti-Black racism should be included, those symbols being the noose, the burning cross, or the white pointed hood. And we've also heard from witnesses about the impact of those symbols. So I'd like to hear your thoughts on whether or not symbols should be included, and if there is going to be a list included, should those anti-Black racism symbols be on that list?
Okay, I'll take this one first then. Thank you, Senator. That's a very good question. I think, well, first of all, we take the position that the symbols shouldn't be included at all because they're a form of expression. And I know some of them are ugly, and that's just beyond question. But they are expressive. They are not in and of themselves conduct that is. Now, they might cross a line. So here's where I would draw the line as pretty much a free speech maximalist. If there's an incitement to violence, or if there is a threat, then throw the book at them. But the mere display of a symbol, and we've talked about a variety of different symbols, and potentially benign symbols that could get caught up in this. And by the way, the other issue, which you may be alluding to here, is that lots of people are going to have different ideas of what symbols should be on that list. We could be at this for years trying to come up with all the different symbols that people find offensive. Some are going to be uniformly agreed to be egregious, but there are going to be a lot of questionable ones, and the door will always then be open for somebody else to get their symbol on the list that they find offensive. I think it's better to draw the line somewhere else and not start including a variety of symbols, because again, it is expressive. It is expressive content. It isn't conduct, but it could cross the line into conduct if it does get into threats. And by all means, then I think that's a police matter.
Thank you. Mr. Joseph.
30 seconds.
Thank you. I wanted to just draw the Senator's attention also to our brief. We do address it. Our Charter Advocates Canada's view would be that the offence itself as proposed is duplicative. The offence already exists in 319 sub 2. 319 sub 7 defines the word statements as including signs or other visible representations. And so what might happen is the police may end up charging people under both of these sections, and then that increases the backlog in the court system for really no added benefit.
We'll now go to Senator Ince.
Thank you so much. My question is for Mr. Joseph. In the TDF's brief yesterday released, you highlighted a potential consequence of bill where all identifiable groups may seek to have hate speech directed against it prosecuted, and failure to prosecute could lead to accusations of political bias, which will undermine the administration of justice. TDF's brief points out that the experience occurred in Britain after the introduction of similar legislation. Based on a similar UK legislation, are there any positives and negative lessons that we could learn from Britain's experience that we could consider with this bill?
That's a good question. I would say that the lessons are mostly negative because there have been plausible accusations of two-tier policing. I'm sure you've seen those. And those are hard to defeat for an administration or a government because it's the perception, of course. So the government can say, look, we have good reasons for persecuting this type of hate speech and not that other speech, but the perception is always going to be different. And so what you get is accusations and counter-accusations, and the government ends up being a referee, and they can never satisfy any set of communities who are accusing each other. So it's mostly negative. I think they have about 12,000 hate speech prosecutions a year or something under their legislation, and that's just a massive diversion of judicial resources. I mean, we're on the ground, and we see our clients spending 13 months from when the charge was laid to just first time they get disclosure. We're dealing with sometimes 3 different crowns just on a mischief charge because they rotate out and we got to brief the charge. This is going to come down to duty counsel and legal aid lawyers dealing with, like I said, duplicate charges, and this stuff is going to clog up the court system, and that's going to take judicial resources away from the serious violent crime that I think all of us want to see punished. So that's really what's happening on the ground. And so I guess my answer would be mostly it's negative.
Thank you.
If I may use some of your time, Senator Ince, Mr. Joseph, you mentioned the number of cases that you've defended. was a list that you provided based on various areas. Would you provide further information as to the success or not of those cases?
Sure. Do you have any particular case in mind?
Ones that would relate specifically to this bill.
Well, I mean, TDF has been mostly successful in some of our defenses. I think the one I would highlight was just to show you the level of the low threshold that the Crown and the police apply when they look at hate speech cases. One client we're defending was alleged to have pointed to a keffiyeh and made a political comment, and she was charged with mischief. We don't know what the actus reus was there, but it was referred to the hate crime unit. So we think that's obviously an edge case, but we're just telling you what the threshold is for the police to refer something to a hate crime unit or see it as a hate crime charge. We had another client who again posted the video posted a link to a video of a movie critical of gender reassignment surgery, and we thought that was an ed case, but that went to trial. We were successful at trial, but the Crown was convinced that was a 319 hate speech crime, and we won, so the judge disagreed, but they were gangbusters to go to trial and to nail this client. So that's where we are with the threshold. And now you're coming in, and this bill, we say, lowers the threshold even further.
Thank you for that. That's helpful, because I believe in previous testimony we've heard about many charges being laid and a lot fewer actually being able to go forward, and even less in terms of actual outcome. So that's helpful as we think through this bill. I'll now go to Senator McFedrin.
Much, Madam Chair, and thank you to all our witnesses for being here with us, for making the time and the effort to actually come here in person. I'm quite taken by some of the concerns that you've expressed, which I would maybe put under a title of overreach. And I want to make sure I've understood. I think I heard, Ms. Bildy, that you referenced the new intimidation offense. Am I correct that it was in your remarks? This question could be answered by any three of you, but I think I picked it up in your remarks. And I think I understood that it was a concern around a vague threshold. What did that actually mean? And I want to be specific because the words are intent to provoke a state of fear, end of quote. To my mind, there's an important difference between having protesting something, having freedom of expression to protest something, maybe unpopular opinion, but nevertheless to protest and potentially disrupt people's lives, the convenience that they would like to have. That, to me, I think is different from the intent to provoke a state of fear. But it's pretty unclear, the threshold. So things like how loud, the presence of a crowd, strong language, polarizing positioning of one's body, those could be interpreted by police as having the intent to provoke a state of fear. You've pointed out, and I agree with you, that these elements are constitutionally protected forms of expression, and peaceful assembly is part of this as well. So let me wrap this up with this question. Do you think we need this bill?
Well, I don't. I think the whole thing should be withdrawn. We've heard from a lot of witnesses, and by the way, I've listened to all the other testimony that you have. A lot of witnesses are very, very concerned about this. A lot of Canadians are concerned. I had actually just saw a message that some 200,000 postcards have been sent into the Senate. So this is a very concerning issue for Canadians. Right. That was the other part of the story. But Yes, I don't think it should pass. I think there's too much subjectivity built into those. It's not very tightly drafted. There are too many concerns about how that will be interpreted, particularly on the ground by police who are in that moment trying to figure out, boy, did they have that intent? Do I think I can establish that? Is it, where does it cross the line? And I do think you need to consider the impact, how fearful the recipient of the target of the protest is. Some people might be very stoic and not be fearful at all, and others might crumble at the thought of walking through a crowd that isn't necessarily being aggressive. So
let me pick up on that, if I may. Do I have a bit of time?
1:45.
Thank you very much. So I think you all agree that I want to just make sure, because only one person has spoken so far, that we don't need to go ahead with this bill, that there are sufficient protections, there are sufficient clarity in existing legislation. Am I getting that correct?
Senator, from our point of view, that's correct. The bill is largely unnecessary. I would say entirely unnecessary. It's duplicative in many senses. I also talked during my response about the constitutionality of Section 319.
Got it. Yeah, thank you. But my question goes now to, do you agree that there is a rising incidence of hate speech and hate action in our country? Do you see that from your perspectives or not?
Well, I think there are tensions mounting across the country for various things. It's becoming, there are a lot of issues that I think are becoming very concerning to Canadians from all walks of life and all backgrounds. And so it isn't, I wouldn't say it's one form of hate or one target of hate. It's bubbling all over the place. And this is why I think I'm such an advocate for free expression, because I really think we need to just talk it through.
I would like to let the other two in our very limited time. Thank you so much. I'm seeing your mic on.
Yeah, look, it's hard to know. I don't know if people have always been fractious and nasty, for lack of a better term, or we're just seeing more of it because we're all interconnected. The whole world is now online, so now it's just a cacophony of people who don't like each other, and there's no consequences for saying whatever you want to say. And our view is we need to be exposed to some of this stuff so we know we can identify the ideologies that are we don't want. If we're not exposed to that stuff.
Would that be a yes to my question that you're perceiving an increase?
Again, it's hard to know.
Okay.
It's hard to know because
Mr. Manson, I think you've got about 30 seconds.
I'll be very quick, Senator. You may be correct that there is an increase. Regardless of whether there is or isn't an increase, the government, the police already have the tools to root out additional hate speech, whatever it is. There's no dearth of tools. It's a matter of enforcement.
We'll now proceed to Senator Martin.
Okay, thank you. I have questions for all three of you. Thank you so much, but I have limited time. I was wanting to direct my question and give you the time, Mr. Manson, especially because you quoted Chief Justice Brian Dixon. There was a lot in there, and I wanted to hear what your interpretation or your assessment of that decision is based on the fact that if this bill does get enacted and we remove that protection, like the significance and the consequences of that. So would you please continue your remarks from where you left off?
Thank you, Senator. My sense of it is that if the defense, the religious defense as I define it in the brief here, if that's removed from the 319 sub 3 defenses, we now have a different legal regime, potentially a different constitutional regime. It's no longer certain that Section 319 sub 2 is constitutional anymore. Now, I think that we can all agree that would be counterproductive. I think it's a good idea. My organization believes it's a good idea to have hate legislation like 319 sub 2. So why would we want to call that back into question? Why would we want to risk having another charter challenge like in Keegstra, where somebody wants to come and say, hey, what I said wasn't hateful or whatever, and the section itself is unconstitutional. That is a massive amount of judicial resources that would be required, probably go back to the Supreme Court of Canada for another go around, when really that would be counterproductive. And to build on what I said in my opening remarks, Senator, we're also considering a defense here that has never been successfully used. It's there. It was part of the constitutional balance that was struck by the court. However, there are other cases. Harding is one of them, which I put into my brief, where in Harding, the accused, in fact, was intermingling some hateful remarks against, I think it was Muslim people, with religious texts. And he tried to use this defense to exonerate himself. And the court said, no, we're not going to have it, because when you intermingle religious texts or quotes with hateful remarks, that is not the intent of the section. So it's a high bar, senators, to actually avail yourself of this defense at all. So why remove it anyway? If it's too high to get to in most cases, where's the need to remove it? Particularly when I go back again, Senator, to my suggestion that we will be maybe undermining the constitutionality of the section of 319 sub 2 at all, which then throws us back into constitutional, uncertainty. And as I'm sure, Senators, you're aware, as lawmakers, we want certainty in Canada. We want uniformity. We want certainty. We don't want people to know when they can and can't say what they want to say.
Yes, and do I have time, Chair?
You have 1:45.
Okay, so this could be Mr. Joseph or Mr. Manson. I was thinking about unintended consequences or concerns or the consequence of the removal, and that there could be even intentional complaints or court cases designed to push legal boundaries. So with the removal of this protection, I feel like there will be more chaos. Am I?
Yeah, look, that's something.
Yeah.
Sure, we think about that because we defend people who preach or discuss the religious texts in the public space. And so just reading from their religious text could then garner a charge, and they'll have no recourse to a religious defense. And again, some people are going to get charged and other people aren't. And then the communities are going to be, there's going to be an accusation of bias here. That's going to happen, I'm telling you. We've got clients now who are wondering. And when it happens, the government's, they're going to have no response to it. It's just because the police are going to say, well, we just happened to pick this guy who made these awful comments reading from his religious book, but we didn't charge this other guy. And again, now you've got more social disharmony rather than less.
Instead of removing it, as Senator Bernard said, there could be education, there could be consistent enforcement. We can focus on resources to do that. But okay, thank you for your answers.
Thank you. We'll now go to Senator Tulajan.
Thank you. I have to apologize. I wasn't here because I was in the chamber asking a question of the Justice Minister. So my question is that critics of Bill C-9 warn that vague definitions, expanded hate speech provisions could chill lawful expression, religious discourse, and political debate. How can Parliament meaningfully combat genuine hate and incitement to violence without creating laws that future governments could use to suppress controversial, unpopular, or dissenting opinions? And do you believe that Bill C-9, as currently written, strikes that balance or crosses a constitutional line?
I'm in first. I don't think we need it because we already have a way of dealing with hate and with incitement to violence. The police have tools, and they need to use those tools. There are a lot of cases where I think that they aren't. They're holding back, and they should be using them. So I don't think we need another piece of legislation. To me, it feels like this bill was designed to sort of appease groups that felt that that the tools weren't being used by the police that they already have. So it was almost sending a message, look, we really care about your issue. No, we're not enforcing it on the ground, but we care about your issue, and here's a new bill. But I don't think it adds anything. It makes things worse.
I agree with my colleague's remarks. I think that really the question here is not necessarily about having new laws. I think we've all of us mentioned that we believe that the laws already exist. We don't need new laws. We need the laws on the books to be enforced. We need perhaps more resources. Perhaps it's a resource allocation issue, not a legal issue. Those would be my comments.
The recurring theme, because we've been sitting for a few, we've had a couple of hearings on this. So the recurring theme seems to be reinforcement of existing laws, is what you're saying. So my question is there anything in this bill that would make the communities safer? I mean, we have laws which are not being, we need to enforce. But this law?
In my submission,
no. No, I would agree.
No, I mean, again, the police, we've seen the police charge people with mischief in the easiest, the most edge cases. So they have laws, they're just not using them.
Do I have time? It's a short question.
2.5 minutes.
So, do you think that this it's open to interpretation? Different people will have different interpretation. I'm thinking, and I'm sorry if anybody else has asked this question already, is, people have religious stickers on their cars. Somebody might say that I feel threatened by that. I mean, has anybody thought this through, like the interpretations? It could be on the person who is interpreting that.
Madam Senator, I think what you're referring to is the hate symbol, the new legislation for hate symbols. I think our testimony, across the panel here, is that offense is duplicative. It's already existing in the criminal law. So you already have a section of the willful promotion of hatred offense, which is 319 sub 2. And 319 sub 7 says statements communicated include signs. And so a sticker on a bumper sticker thing, that would be arguably a sign. And therefore, if the police would like to charge somebody with displaying that sign in a hateful way, I don't know that would happen on a bumper sticker, but if they wanted to try to do that, they could. My point is the offense already exists. And so if the police want to do that, they can do it already.
Thank you, Senator. We'll now go to Senator Wells.
Thank you, Chair. First, for the record, I want to read from, this is Canada's website, that says, police reported hate crime has risen from 2,646 reported incidents in 2020 to 4,882 incidences in 2024. That's a 54% increase in 4 years. And of course, the research also tells us that police-reported hate crimes are actually vastly underreported for many kinds of reasons: trust with law enforcement, education. So that's just the tip of the iceberg that is actually being reported to police. So maybe my question then will go to Mr. Manson. The Minister of Justice and Department of Justice officials testified at this committee that logically, a good faith act, whether it is religious or non-religious, would not be consistent with what is already determined in the law, that an act of hate must be willfully promoted and targeted to an identifiable group. I think you said in your opening remarks that you did not agree, and if that is the case, could you give us an example that would show us why the Minister and the Department of Justice experts are mistaken?
I'm having just trouble following the question. Could you maybe try that one more time for me? I'm sorry.
No, please, pleasure. We heard from the Minister of Justice and the Department of Justice officials testify at this committee that logically a good faith act, whether it is religious or non-religious in intent, would not be consistent with what is already determined in the law, that an act of hate must be willfully promoted and targeted to an identifiable group, right? This isn't broad, it is narrow to an identifiable group and must be willfully promoted. So I'm wondering if you would agree with that, and or if not, why then would the Minister of Justice and the justice officials be in error?
I think a good faith act is what these defenses are trying to establish. This is what they're going to, I think, in my submission. These 4 defenses, all, I believe, the Chief Justice said in Keystra, are examples of good faith acts. And so this is, again, as I mentioned in my opening statement, part of the rationale for the constitutionality of the offense overall. So once again, to take away this one of the four defenses potentially undermines the entire constitutionality of the offense. If we take away the religious defense, as we call it, then, as I think my friend Mr. Joseph, my colleague Mr. Joseph just said, you could have a minister in church about to give a sermon, not knowing anymore whether she or he is allowed to say certain things, certain passages of the Bible, for example. I'm not sure that that's really what we want in a free and democratic society.
But would that be, without willful promotion of hatred, reading scripture would not apply to the legislation?
That is potentially true, yes, I would agree.
So we haven't talked about yet the four greater certainty clauses that were added to the legislation that some would argue are actually more effective than having the good faith clause in there. I'm just wondering if you have comment if those four greater certainty clauses do not satisfy the concerns that you've raised.
Senator, I've also addressed this in our written submissions, and I certainly commend that to you. The greater certainty clarification provision in our submission is really tautological. All it says is, for greater certainty, just understand that if nobody willfully promotes hatred, then you won't be, found guilty of the offense. Well, that's sort of obvious, I think. It's just sort of an obvious statement that really I don't think adds any protection in reality. I think what we're doing with that is we're swapping out, in my submission, one defense that really does have some protection, albeit, as I mentioned a couple minutes ago, it's a high bar to clear, but there is some protection there, versus a statement that in my submission really doesn't provide much of anything. It's really kind of a nothing statement in my submission.
I do think we would agree that the threshold is very high to prove willful promotion of hatred, and there have been very few successful cases with that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Wells. If there are no further questions, I'm looking at Senator Simons. No? Okay. Those are all. Did you have a question, Senator McFadden?
Maybe missed this plane, but I can't, if I can line up.
I don't know. You choose. You choose. We will not make that decision for you.
Thank you. One more question, and it's the intimidation clause and it's the obstruction clause. And noticing that there is some protection in the obstruction clause and there is no protection in the intimidation clause. And I wondered what your thoughts were on that. And I'll just be transparent. I'm looking at the possibility of an amendment that at least has something in each of those clauses if this bill goes ahead. I put my notes away, so it's 423. It's all captured in 423.
Well, Senator, overall, I think our position would be that the offense itself really is not necessary. Once again,
I've got that.
Thank you.
But if the bill goes ahead, that's my question.
What is the protection, Senator, that you're looking for?
Well, in the obstruction clause, there's a defining of a threshold. In the intimidation clause, there is really no threshold. So it's highly, highly subjective, in my opinion. And I wondered if you'd looked at that. And maybe you could write a response.
Perhaps that would be better, Senator. Thank you. I haven't addressed that.
Write it for the committee.
All right.
Thank you. I'd appreciate it.
And in good time, as we are planning to go to clause by clause on Monday. Great. If there are no further questions, Senator Toulajan, did you have a follow-up?
Yeah. So in discussions with our colleagues on the other side, and we talk about Section 319, they say, well, it has never been used. So my, response would be, it has never been used, and why remove it?
Precisely.
It's a high bar, as you said.
Correct, Senator.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for providing clarity there. And so thank you, Senators. We have come to the end of this panel. So on behalf of the committee, we would like to sincerely thank you for appearing, particularly in person, and for taking the time to share your expertise with us. Your testimony will be very helpful as we move on to deliberations of this bill. I will now suspend this meeting briefly while we get ready for our final panel. distinction. Our witnesses have been asked to make an ongoing statement of 5 minutes each. This will be followed by questions from the senators. With us in person, we welcome Julia Beasley, Director, the Evangelical Fellowship of Canada's Centre of Faith and Public Life. We also welcome Dana, am I saying that correctly? Deanna Warren, Director of Legal Affairs, Canadian Centre for Christian Charities. And finally, Joseph Wesley Richards II, Vice President and General Counsel, Seventh-day Adventist Church in Canada. We also have with us by video conference, Philip Horgan, President and General Counsel, Catholic Civil Rights League. Welcome to you all. I invite Ms. Beasley to make her presentation, followed by Ms. Warren, followed by Mr. Richards II, and concluding with Mr. Horgan. Over to you, Ms. Beasley.
Thank you, Madam Chair, honourable senators. The Evangelical Fellowship of Canada is the National Association of Evangelical Christians in Canada. We provide a forum for collaboration and engagement among the roughly 2 million evangelicals who are part of our constituency. We are grateful for the opportunity to speak to this committee's important work on Bill C-9. Religious freedom, expression, and collaboration have been hallmarks of the EFC's work for decades. We work together with interfaith partners on issues of common concern and share in dialogue about the role of religion in a pluralistic society. This committee has done important work in studying and naming the alarming increase in anti-Semitism in Canada. We, too, are deeply concerned by the escalation of anti-Semitic incidents in recent years and the violent and fatal attacks against Muslims. These acts are unacceptable. We recognize the danger when groups are targeted on the basis of religious belief or practice and have joined with other faith groups to stand against hatred based on religious identity. At a time of growing intolerance toward religious groups in Canada, Parliament's duty to ensure the protection of faith communities is especially critical. We strongly support the intent of Bill C-9 to address anti-religious threats and violence. Our primary concern with the bill before you is that it would remove the religious belief defense from Section 319(3) of the Criminal Code. This defense acts as an important safeguard for religious expression. It serves to ensure the hate provisions intended to protect identifiable groups are not used to silence or suppress the religious beliefs of persons or communities that the majority or other communities might find objectionable or offensive. In the 1990 Keystra decision, the Supreme Court of Canada found the willful promotion of hatred offence to be constitutional. And as you heard, the majority of the court considered the defences, including the good faith religious belief defence, to be important and integral to its constitutionality, as they clarify the intent of Parliament to restrict its application and are essential to the balance the current criminal code provisions seek to strike between protecting individuals and communities from hate and protecting expression. Departmental officials stated that repealing the defense reinforces the narrow scope of the offense. But in the Keystra decision, the court found the defenses served to clarify the scope of the offense. Justice Dixon wrote that the defenses provide an assurance, a strong signal, that the expression of religious belief and opinion, however unpopular, will not be swept in the ambit of the offense. And removal of that strong signal that the sincere, good faith expression of minority religious beliefs is not meant to be captured by Section 319(2) would be understood as further marginalization of religious beliefs. And we do not believe this is Parliament's intent. We recommend then that the clause in Bill C-9 which repeals the good faith religious belief defense be deleted. If the defense is removed, it is critically important that it be clarified in the legislation that religious texts in and of themselves are not to be considered hate, nor is good faith teaching or preaching from these texts. We welcome the minister's strong commitment to uphold and protect religious expression and the reassurance that Canadians will always be able to pray, preach, teach, interpret scripture, and express religious beliefs in good faith without fear of criminal sanction. But the minister's statements don't have the same impact as a legislative protection or safeguard that's written into the law. We also appreciate that the clarification clause was introduced in response to the concerns we and many others have raised about removal of the defense. And while we welcome the intent of the new for greater certainty clause, it doesn't offer the needed interpretive clarity or protection for good faith religious expression. It merely restates the mens rea requirement of the offense. Before this committee, the minister said that a clarification clause shifts the protection of good faith religious practice so that it is considered from the outset in the definition of hate and what a hate crime is, rather than as a defense. We would welcome a clear recognition through the definition of hate, through an amended clarification clause, that the good faith practice and expression of religious belief is not a hate crime to begin with. But in order for that upfront clarity to be achieved, the clarification clause must be amended. We support the amendment proposed by the Christian Legal Fellowship and urge this committee to amend the clause as they recommend at minimum. Further, we recommend that the amended clarifying clause be included in the criminal code rather than existing in the bill alone, in order to provide the needed interpretive clarity. Lastly, we recommend the new standalone hate offense be limited to criminal code offenses. Criminal proceedings have robust procedural protections and evidentiary threshold that may not be required by other acts of Parliament. If a criminal charge is to be laid, it should be for an offense that is tried in a criminal court. Thank you. I look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Ms. Beasley. And we'll now go to Ms. Diana Warren.
Thank you, Madam Chair and honorable senators, for the opportunity to appear before you today. My name is Dina Warren, and I am the Director of Legal Affairs at the Canadian Centre for Christian Charities, also known as the 4Cs. 4Cs is a registered charity that supports thousands of Christian ministries across Canada, including churches, schools, camps, relief organizations, environmental protection groups, prison outreach, and all kinds of community services like food banks, recovery programs, and shelters. Our member charities joyfully serve their neighbors and communities because of their faith, giving of themselves and their resources to support others and affirm the inherent worth and dignity of each person is part and parcel of our shared Christian beliefs. And I want to be very clear, because of these beliefs, 4Cs supports efforts to combat anti-Semitism and other forms of hateful conduct. We understand the good desire to address this real issue. Our concern is therefore not with the goal of reducing criminal acts of hate, but we do have concerns with the means set out in Bill C-9. Specifically, I'd like to emphasize 3 issues. First, we question the impulse to expand criminal code offenses. Second, we urge the committee to reinstate the good faith religious defense. And third, we also urge the committee to retain but amend the for greater certainty clause. First, we question the impulse to expand criminal code offenses. Perhaps it stems from a charity perspective where resources are always constrained and leaders ask, what can we accomplish with what we have? But it is our position that before Parliament expands criminal offences, it's incumbent to ask whether existing tools are being effectively used. If not, why not? What are the barriers to effective enforcement? We see this as necessary for 3 reasons. 1, criminal law is the most coercive power the state possesses. Expanding it requires restraint, clarity, and precision, particularly when charter freedoms such as expression and religion are engaged and where the right to liberty is at stake. 2, expanding hate crimes without understanding what enforcement issues exist will only serve to perpetuate those same issues in the context of new offenses. And 3, it misses an opportunity to redress potential problems in a more efficient, economical, or effective way. We already have a robust framework of criminal code provisions to curtail the willful promotion of hatred and related offenses to support them, such as prohibiting mischief relating to religious property, educational institutions, or for those used by identifiable groups for administrative, social, cultural, or sports activities. Second, we ask the committee to reinstate the good faith religious defense. It is hard to overstate the depth of concern expressed by religious individuals, communities, and organizations about the repeal of this defense. I've had organizations specifically ask whether and how they can continue to share publicly about what they believe in the Bible. Can they still tell someone that they believe Jesus died to forgive their sins or that believing in Jesus is the only way to eternal life? Like this Christian belief, other religions also make exclusive truth claims. and they regularly teach and discuss beliefs about morality, sexuality, and human flourishing in ways that may be controversial, unpopular, and even offensive to those who may not agree. In a free and pluralistic society, that reality is inevitable and, in fact, welcome, because diversity of ideas and opinions is one of the hallmarks of a free society. The question is whether people can continue to express those beliefs in good faith, reassured that their lawful religious expression will not be caught up in an expanded hate speech framework. This is not an abstract concern. During the House study of this bill, specific Bible passages were described as clearly hateful. And questions asked in this committee have described the Christian faith as a place where people experience harm based on hate. These comments, even if unintended, underscore why 4Cs urges this committee to reinstate the good faith religious defense. As Mr. Mason explained earlier, the Supreme Court in Keegstra confirmed that the defenses maintain the constitutionality of the offense. It's not a loophole to protect hateful expression cloaked in a veneer of religious language. Rather, its presence makes the scope of the offense more explicit and ensures freedom of expression is not curtailed in borderline cases. For all of these reasons, the good faith religious defense should not be the victim of political bargaining, and we urge the committee to reinstate the defense. Third, 4Cs is concerned that the good intent behind the For Greater Certainty clause is undermined in its drafting. As written, it is circular and simply restates the offense itself. In practical terms, Canadians are left to ask what expression remains protected and what expression risks prosecution. This uncertainty is troubling in the criminal law context. Citizens must be able to understand the boundaries of lawful conduct as written in the text of the criminal code. We therefore urge the committee to include an amended clause in the code, and we also, like the EFC, support the specific amendment proposed by Christian Legal Fellowship in its brief. In conclusion, 4Cs believes it is possible to combat hate offenses while also protecting the freedoms that sustain a diverse and democratic society. Those goals are not in conflict. We urge this committee to approach expanding criminal offenses through Bill C9 with restraint, precision, and careful attention to the impact these provisions may have on religious communities across Canada. Thank you, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you. Mr. Richards, a second.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Senators. I'm Joseph Richards, the General Vice President and Legal Counsel for the Seventh-day Adventist Church in Canada. My remarks will focus on the good faith religious opinion defense. Je vais commencer en français.
I'm going to start in French. Just to properly situate you, I'm the son, and I think it's important to mention this, I'm the son of immigrants who left Jamaica to set up in Sudbury, Ontario. I was born in Sudbury, I grew up in Sudbury, and they brought with them their Christian faith, and I fit in with that faith today. I am one of 20 million members of the Adventist Church in the world, of which there are 80,000 in Canada.
Across the country, honoring the Sabbath established by God at creation and looking forward to the soon coming of Jesus Christ. It is because of our distinctive beliefs that we have a special interest in religious liberty matters. For us, this interest is not theoretical, it's real, it's practical. It has led our members to go right up to the Supreme Court of Canada, advancing the law of religious accommodation on multiple occasions. It has led us to publish exactly 120 years ago, this year, Liberty Magazine, the oldest continuously published journal on religious freedom in the world. I now turn to Bill C9. I reviewed a recent email from an MP which reads in part, and I quote, "I support Bill C9 because its core purpose is to better protect the freedoms of religion and expression." Note the MP's support was tied not to what is actually written, but what its core purpose is, not whether each amendment is necessary, but what its core purpose is. The statement sounds reassuring and no doubt well-intentioned, but it is a reasoning that should concern us all. I submit that the purpose of the bill is not enough. The purpose must be weighed against the text, against the risk of misuse, against a basic question. Is each proposed change tied to the stated purpose? This brings me to the removal of the good faith religious opinion defense. I've yet to hear a sound, legally defensible reason for removing it. When pressed on the issue at second reading, no direct answer was provided, and the matter was deferred to the minister. The absence of an immediate and clear explanation is all the more troubling given the legal history. Our hate speech laws have stood this test of time. In the seminal case, and we've heard it multiple times today, the case of Keegstra, the majority referred to the statutory defenses as, quote, an aid in making the scope of the willful promotion of hatred more explicit. Question, why remove an interpretive aid? The Supreme Court treated the defenses as part of the very definition of willful promotion of hatred, as a helpful clarifier of the limited scope of the offense's reach. In criminal law, we should always err on the side of clarity, not on removing familiar, long-standing provisions. Lastly, let us consider the for greater certainty clause that was added by the House Justice Committee. We have two principal concerns. First, it introduces uncertainty. It protects only statements on a matter of public interest and only in the course of a discussion, publication, or debate. That may not clearly capture ordinary religious communication, such as sermons or doctrinal teaching. Second, as we have heard, it is circular. The clause refers only to a person who does not willfully promote hatred, but that is already the central legal question under subsection 319(2). So the clause does not, in fact, create an independent safeguard. It simply restates the current test. The result, potentially a chilling effect. When criminal law is unclear, people self-censor and lawful religious expression is muted, all to avoid complaints, investigation, stigma, and legal costs. In closing, let me say this plainly. Seventh-day Adventists stand against hate. Like all Canadians, we want safe communities where people flourish, free from discrimination, free from abuse. We advocate for the rights of those who believe like us, those who believe differently than us, and those who do not believe at all. Toutefois, dans une société libre.
However, in a free and democratic society, the criminal law should establish clear boundaries and accessible ones, especially when such fundamental freedoms protected by the Charter are involved. In its current form, Bill C-9 does not meet this requirement.
Replace the for greater certainty clause and retain the good faith religious opinion defense in the criminal code. Thank you, senators, for listening. Merci beaucoup. I welcome your questions.
Thank you, Mr. Richards. We'll now go to Mr. Horgan.
Thank you, and good afternoon, senators. I appear before you. My name is Philip Horgan. I'm the president and general counsel of the Catholic Civil Rights League. That is a national lay organization seeking to ensure a fair hearing of Catholic positions on matters of public debate. The CCRL has in the past brought submissions to the Parliament of Canada on a host of issues over the years, and we have intervened in Supreme Court cases on over 25 occasions over the past 30 years. On behalf of our national membership and millions of Roman Catholics across Canada, I propose to speak to the bill generally, but in particular, the proposed removal of the defense of reliance on religious texts, that provision of the existing section 319 sub 3 sub b. I share the concerns of others here and on the other speakers over other aspects, over certainty of certain provisions, or the wide application to all laws of Parliament provided in section 320.1001. But I really wish to focus on the importance of that religious text defense. It's helpful to go through a brief history of hate charge provisions. Originally introduced after the Special Committee on Hate Propaganda in Canada, the Cohen Committee, in 1970, hate charges were introduced to the criminal code with the provision that protected anyone who, in quotes, good faith, expressed or attempted to establish by argument an opinion on a religious subject. In 2004, there were efforts to amend the criminal code related to hate propaganda. But on that occasion, section 319 sub 3 sub b was updated to its current form, which I won't repeat. But politicians as diverse as Sven Robinson, Derek Lee, and Paul Macklin all spoke in favor of maintaining that religious text defense. In the words of Sven Robinson at the time, it was updated to ensure that the defense would explicitly make it clear that religious texts were not being targeted by the amendment. In the midst of that, we have the post-charter case of Keegstra already mentioned, and I won't share the money quotes already made reference to by my friends. But the reality is that the court, in a 4-3 decision, recognized those defenses provided by 319 were important to allow for the constitutionality of the legislation. That hasn't stood in the way of prosecutions where defendants may have relied upon or tried to exercise the good faith religious defense. We've seen the case of Harding in Ontario, as well as Popescu of relatively recent date, where whether the terms used as being a Trojan horse or not, in fact, of on point with the allegations of pursuing or pushing people to action through violence. A question was raised in the earlier panel. Have we seen a concern about using Section 2B, the freedom of expression provision? We already had from our Court of Appeal in Ontario, in the case of Bracken from 2017, that acts of violence or physical or threats of violence do not come within the scope of Section 2B. The current revised bill has passed third reading, and owing to the deal with the Bloc in December, the bill removed that religious text defense. The deal with the Bloc may these days not be required given the changes to the composition of the House of Commons as of the past few weeks. But in our view, the removal of the religious text defense would no longer expressly protect good faith religious expression as a distinct category. The risk of ignoring our history invites the risk of drifting into constitutional error. On the passage of the bill and its long history, the maintenance of the charge with those defenses has been understood as meeting constitutional scrutiny. Take away one side of that, and the arguments of the minority from Keegstra have greater weight. We submit that the impact of removal of that section removes the balancing that was approved by the Supreme Court in Keegstra. Finally, in our submission, the repeal of that specific legal protection is a significant change that the Senate should recommend to restore. Thank you.
Thank you all, and thank you for reasonably staying within time limits. We appreciate that. I would now like to go to my colleagues for questions, and I will begin with Senator Simons.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. I wasn't expecting that. Thank you very much to all of our witnesses. Mr. Richards, I think I want to come and hear you in your other life. That was we hear a lot of testimony, and that was pretty gripping. I guess I want to ask all. I don't know if I need to go with all four of you, but perhaps I'll ask Ms. Warren and Mr. Richards to start. Good faith is a phrase that doesn't have, to me, a very clear meaning. And I fear that most of the concern around the good faith defense has to do with homophobia. I mean, I don't think, with all due respect, I don't think anybody is saying that you're going to be prosecuted for a hate crime for saying that Christ is the one true Savior or that Christianity is the one true faith. That's not what we're talking about here. I mean, let's not be cute. We're talking about homophobia. We're talking about, I remember an incident in Alberta where a candidate who was running for Danielle Smith's party was a minister and had written on his blog that all homosexuals would burn in a lake of eternal fire. And he was never charged with anything. He was eventually dropped as a candidate. And I would never want him to be charged. But how do you know if somebody's acting in good faith as opposed to maliciously manipulating scripture, as the devil does to his own purpose?
Thank you for your question, Senator. And just to be, the question that I did pose about a savior and salvation, those were legitimate questions that were brought to me by an organization with concerns in the context of this bill. So just to be clear, I wasn't trying to be trite. I was actually conveying the nature of concerns that we have received and heard.
I think you would have to acknowledge that is a misunderstanding of what we're talking about here. That is a kind of a hysteria that is not borne out.
Maybe. I think it demonstrates the depth of concern, and I'm happy to move to the substance of the remainder of your question at this point. And certainly, I think actually the idea that the question of linking homophobia with a conviction about the nature of human sexuality is a concern in and of itself. Is holding to a traditional biblical sexual ethic homophobic, and I think the equation of those two things is problematic in the nature of the question. Believing in a certain conviction does not mean that you are a homophobic person, and I think that linkage is problematic. And in terms of understanding what good faith is, I think we can look at some of the case law. So, for example, in the Harding case, that Mr. Horgan referred to, the defendant did try to assert a good faith religious defense, and the court grappled with that and found that, given the evidence, it was not an applicable defense in that case. And so I think within the jurisprudence, we can find the courts are able to grapple with that and understand that, and to effect. I don't know if Mr. Richards has a different perspective.
No, I largely agree with Ms. Warren on this. It's really based on context, and we have a beautiful system of law in Canada, and that's common law, right? So every case is decided on its facts, and when you have those contextual evidence that comes forward in a trial, you'll be able to discern whether the person is acting in good faith, at least in order to prove, as all criminal offenses, you have to prove guilt beyond a reasonable doubt. I'll give you the example of Popescu, which all Siberians know very well, because it's a Siberian who is a continuous candidate for office. And I was actually in the prosecutor's office on his first prosecution.
I was trying to think, what religious sect is that? But no, okay.
No. People from Sudbury know Popescu, and he's always in the newspaper. Sorry, but in the first case, I was actually in the prosecutor's office at the time, but the second case that was referenced here in 2020, what was the context? He was advocating for the execution of the Premier of Ontario, right? And he did that very boldly, baldly, without any wrestling even with the text. He just said it. He was making these types of pronouncements.
Premier Wynne he was talking about?
Yes,
okay.
Precisely. He was talking about Premier Wynne.
Yeah.
And so, again, context would be able to tell you that is an extreme manifestation. That is outside of the parameters. It is difficult, though, I grant you. It's a difficult exercise. But our courts, as has been explained in the cases of Popescu and Harding and others, have been able to do that weighing on a case-by-case basis. They have wrestled with cases going back to Keekstra onward, and they are the best able to do that interpretation.
If I have time. Do I have time?
You
or a
don't,
second
but
round?
I'll extend you another 2 minutes.
All right. I want to ask you about something completely different that the three of you didn't really address, except Ms. Beasley at the very beginning. And that is the parts of this bill that protect religious institutions from protest, from violence, that protect cemeteries, that protect, say, a retirement home that is run by a church. Can you talk to me a little bit about any one of the four of you? If you think that those protections could be beneficial for your faith communities and protect you from hatred, or not even from hatred, because those sections don't actually speak to hatred. They just speak to people protesting, blocking, denying access.
In a minute, or we could go to second round.
We go to second round. Think about that, and then we'll come back.
Okay. Yes. We'll now go to Sarah Arnold.
Merci, Madame la Présidente.
Okay, so I'd like to first of all thank all of you for being here today, and particularly to those who spoke about the interfaith work that you're doing in your communities. Like, that's really important, and I commend you for that, because I think as leaders in your respective communities, that is work that really needs to be done. We understand this is a very blunt tool. So I'm hoping that you can help me wrap my head around the concerns you've expressed by giving us a really concrete, tangible example of where you believe hate crime charges could realistically be laid related to expression of religious beliefs to the point that they are interpreted as hate crimes. And Ms. Warren, you talked a bit about your example. I think, obviously, if this were to pass, it's going to have to be coupled with really great communication about where the lines are and that sort of thing. So I'm looking for a tangible example.
I will just say we have been asked a number of times if we can provide a specific example of the kinds of communication that would be captured, and we don't have specific examples. Within our community, we consider it a high responsibility, an important part of our calling, how we communicate, how we express our beliefs. So we haven't come up with a specific example of the kind of communication. What we are concerned about is the trends in public discourse, as Dina alluded to, where simply holding and expressing minority religious beliefs on different topics are often characterized as hateful in and of themselves. We recognize the high bar that has been set by the courts thus far, and we understand that the public discourse and the court of public opinion is not the same as a criminal proceeding. But I think we want to be really careful that we're not creating, within this context of the public discourse as it is, that we're not creating conditions under which people could be subject to charges where they shouldn't be, where there is that risk, whether it is perceived or not, and whether or not those charges are successful. One of the witnesses the other day spoke powerfully to kind of just the consequences of having a charge laid. It may not be successful, but the consequences economically, socially, for employment and other things to having a charge laid, we want to ensure that clarity remains, that this is not intended to be captured by this offense.
We have time? Is there anyone else who'd like to answer that?
I could wade in potentially, if allowed. In the Catholic community, you've already received numerous submissions from priests and bishops' conferences on the removal of the religious text and or opinion defenses, and you're looking for potential concerns raised. Well, there's a chilling, before even a charge is laid, for which you may require the Attorney General's leave, there's the